Test. It's inclusive. Okay. Yeah, that way. It's all inclusive. Okay. Just want to make sure. Yep. Yeah.
All right, we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Everyone, get set.
Yeah, I made it. Didn't know if I could get in here.
All right, 1 minute.
They're usually running all about the same. What do you go by the satellites? 529.
All right, let's convene the budget meeting tonight. I'm going to begin with a really quick announcement regarding Friday morning. Bill Lockwood and Dr. Rome and Mayor Strumpf will be on, what station is that, Bill? KWOS? KWOS at 8:30, talking about the multipurpose building. So if anyone wants to tune in for that, Friday morning at 8:30, KWOS. Otherwise, I will call on the city administrator. If you want to get us started, please. Thank you.
Appreciate that. I just wanted to have a few comments. Wanted to thank Bill Betts and his staff and the department directors all for a lot of hard work and thorough work in putting the budget together. So I appreciate all of that work. As you know, we're going to be pursuing the Governmental Finance Officers Association budget recognition. We're still developing some of the components for that, some broad performance measures, some capital plans, some multi-year budgeting. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about some of those in the budget process a little bit later on as we get closer to finishing some of the budget process. Being new to the city and having to get started relatively soon on the budget, I didn't have an opportunity to get into as much big picture detail as I would have liked, but certainly plan to do so as we work throughout some of the budget challenges throughout the year. And it was a tight budget. There were more requests for stuff, people, equipment, cars, than there were resources available, which is somewhat expected. And just because something's not in the budget, that doesn't mean that that particular item wasn't important. There are a lot of important needs that didn't show up in the budget, but it's just a matter of balancing, from my point of view at least, it's a matter of balancing priorities. The individual departments, I had budget reviews with them and discussed with department directors their priorities, reviewed specifics, including documentation that they had for their budgets, encouraged consideration of different options. I encouraged departments to look at alternative scheduling, use of technology, use of different equipment, even use of part-time personnel, job sharing, things like that. And I think they did a good job of looking at some of those different kinds of alternatives. So Bill's going to go over some very basic, brief, fund-related kinds of things, how some of the different pieces work together for some of the newer council people, and then talk a little bit about some of the bigger picture kinds of items that impacted all the different budgets, and then I assume we're ready to get into specifics however you may want to do so.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Bill, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. No problem. As Steve said, before we get into the department level budgets, he's asked me to kind of give a little brief overview of the funds and how those work together, just for some of the newer council folks and for the folks at home. But as part of our budget process, we have the general fund, which is where police and fire, the two departments we're going to be discussing tonight, as well as most of the administrative departments, public works, planning and protective services, all fall under. So we also have funds that we call enterprise funds. Those funds consist of transit, airport, wastewater, and parking. Along with that, we have the Parks Fund, which is a special revenue fund. The point that about that we want to make is anytime we make changes to those enterprise funds, they rarely have an impact on the general fund. Transit and airport are a little bit different. So if you add more money in parking or you cut expenses in parking, that will not have any impact on the general fund. The money does not cross paths there, so they're separate in and of themselves. It's a little different for transit and airport because both of them get a subsidy from the general fund. So the general fund does help them with their operations. For instance, transit this year, the subsidy is $1,095,200. And the airport is $196,059. So there is. So if you do make some changes in airport and transit, it does have an impact whether or not we increase the subsidy or decrease the subsidy there for those two funds. But for the other ones, they are whole and self-serving on their own. I just discussed the process of how we developed the budget this year, so everybody knows. The department directors gave their budget to the city administrator. And along with their pink sheets, you can see that in your budget books under the department director requested line items. As Steve mentioned earlier, not everything was funded. Steve took the information that he had, met with the department directors, and then he did the very best that he could to balance a budget and come up with a budget that he felt was the best. From there, Steve took his budget, met with the mayor, gave him the information. The mayor made some decisions, just a couple that were a little different than Steve's, but they had several discussions, and now we have the mayor's budget. And what we discuss in these meetings is the mayor's budget. We talk about the mayor's proposed budget there. So just some highlights about the budget. The budget has increased this year about 2.5%, roughly 2.5% from last year. The budget includes a 2% raise and an additional holiday. The budget the only capital purchases that the budget includes is police cars. I want to mention a little bit about police cars. I'm sure Chief Schrader will talk about it as well. But there are 5 police cars in the general fund budget. In order to balance the budget, there was a request for 9. The other 4 police cars we're recommending come out of sales tax E. There's an unassigned portion of our sales tax funds from time to time, and that happens due to interest or due to projects being completed, and there'll be small amounts, a few $1,000s here or there left over. So we have a pool of money that is unassigned at this point in sales tax E. That's the previous sales tax. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, what fund are we in? Are we spending F or
We're
E?
spending F mainly. There's still some money in sales tax E as well that's being spent, but we're in the F sales tax for collections and spending today.
All right, so some of those police cars would be paid for with E money and some with F money?
No, other five will be paid out of the general fund. So we're recommending 5 be paid from the general fund and 4 from sales tax E.
All right, thank you.
Another thing I'd like to point out about in the police department is last year we used a police training fund for all of their training needs. And this year we're recommending doing a similar thing in order to keep the budget balanced, is to use the police training fund. That does have a pretty significant impact on that fund. We estimate by the end of the year of 2015, not 2014, that there'll be roughly $5,000 to $10,000 left in the police training fund. There's revenue that comes into there as well as expenses, so that's why we can't give you an exact number, but our rough estimate is $5,000 to $10,000.
And where does that fund come from? Is that general fund? Is that
No, the police
Court?
training fund is its own fund, and they receive funding there from citations that they write, and the state gives them a certain amount of money. Of those citations comes back to the city. It's its own fund, so it has a fund balance, and as part of that fund balance, we're recommending that the money come from that fund balance in order to pay for their training for this coming year.
And I think it's limited to training too, isn't it?
It's limited, single-purpose
That's the
fund.
purpose for it.
so? This is in addition to the funds that we would provide for regular training.
Right. Except in the instance of the police department, there are no funds in their budget for training. So, in the general fund, all of their money, all of their training will come from the police training fund this year. It's very similar to how we handled it this year. I wanted to make it pointed out to everyone, just so everyone knows that next year, as part of the budget, that will probably have to be something that we have to change and discuss. Vacant positions. Oh, yep. Right. I think in the past, the way that it's worked is the general revenue has taken care of a good portion of the police training. Last year, with the budget, we changed that around a little bit. So they had a pretty good fund balance. I can't give you the exact number, but I want to say it was roughly $100,000. And so that was spent down in 2014, the current budget year that we're in, and we're recommending to continue to spend that down as part of 2015. So,
But there's also new money that comes in.
right. There are some vacant positions that are part of the plan, and of those positions, let me give you that list here real quick so everybody knows what they are. There is one position in administration, the communications manager, one position in either finance or HR, depending on the budget. There's been some discussion of maybe moving a finance person to HR. There's still some discussion there, so there's one position there. There is a MSAG records supervisor in the police department, one police officer, one police information clerk, which would be in the records department. There's one fire training officer, 2 firefighters, a public works civil engineer, a public works engineering designer, and 2 street maintenance workers. Those are positions where they were part of the SIP and vacancy savings programs in the past, and we just held them open. No one was replaced or let go as part of eliminating them from the budget. The previous 2 years, what we did was we just had a line item in non-departmental that we called SIP or vacancy savings, left the positions open and vacant, and we just kind of accounted for those that way. As part of this budget process, it's been proposed to just eliminate those positions, and if we want to add them at a later time, or if the council wants to add them during this budget process, they're welcome to do so. Okay, good. The way that it worked last year is we put all the funding into each department, and then in the non-departmental we had a negative expense line item that we had to turn around and zero out by pulling. So if a position was in the fire department, for instance, we funded the position and then we took the money out of the fire department and added it to non-departmental, so it lowered that negative number until we balanced that out. I'm not sure where the $1 million figure comes from. Last year in 2013 we had about a $300,000 surplus, and some portion of that. Right. What I think what you're talking about there is right now our revenues are coming in $1 million ahead of projections, so there is potential for there to be, a surplus of money that goes back to fund balance of $1 million at the end of the year. Obviously, we have to take into account any supplemental appropriations that we do and the expenses and how they might work out. But
just exactly how that.
oh, sure. The way that I don't know that it helped make the surplus, but certainly if we filled those positions, we would have probably projected, somehow either had to take money from fund balance, or we would have had to project revenues higher in order to have a balanced budget. So at the end of the year, once we're done completing, having those positions vacant certainly has helped us keep the budget balanced over the last couple of years. I don't know that they've made it.
Well, I mean, if we were carrying it as a part of our total budget, but never really intending to spend it. That's why I'm.
Oh, okay, I got what you're saying.
It's a good thing to do what we're doing.
Right.
Because we were carrying it on a budget and never really intending to spend it.
It was never funded, really. You
Never
put the
really
money
funded
in and you
it.
took it out, and it got
As a
confusing.
zero.
But there's other reasons for
Sure.
having it there as well.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
I
that's-
just wanted more clarity on that.
I'm going to wrap up here real quick just to give a few more highlights, and then I'll be done. Leaving the general fund for a moment, and just wanting to point out a few things about transit and the airport and wastewater, some of the enterprise funds. As part of transit, one of the recommendations has been to take a look at the transit fares, and there's a recommendation to have a 50-cent increase for regular rides there. Obviously, there will be a lot of hearings that have to take place prior to that taking effect, and staff estimates that the increase for 2015 will be roughly $30,000 if such an item was done. As part of the airport, we're using the airport. There's about a $40,000 fund balance in the airport, and that's happened over several years. As part of balancing the budget for 2015, we're recommending reducing their fund balance in order to balance the budget. We don't believe the airport should have a fund balance since they are subsidized by the general fund. So to help offset the cost of the general fund, we're recommending using that $40,000. And I'll end with this. As part of the wastewater budget, you'll see there a good portion, not a good portion, but several pink sheet items in the wastewater budget have been approved. It's going to reduce their fund balance by $940,000. Their fund balance is over $1 million or over $4 million at the end of 2013. Reducing it this $940,000 we do not feel has a significant impact on them doing their operations. And if you're interested in seeing what projects will be funded with that $940,000, you can see that starting on page 257 of your budget books, going through page 279. Any of the items that were funded have that annotated next to them. So that's just a brief overview of the budget and those types of things.
And I just wanted to add one thing. I think Bill mentioned it on health insurance. We're looking at an overall 10% increase in health insurance. Actually, the increase was much more than that based on our current plan, but we're looking at some plans that adjust some of that number, and so we feel confident that we can come in with a 10% increase, but it'd probably be a plan change. So.
All right. Any questions on the up here, Mr. Mahalovich?
As a point of overview, this is back to Bill. I think it's real significant for us to understand that these vacancy savings were the result of not filling a position versus whether they were SIP. Because if they were SIP, that means that they were hired folks that decided to take advantage of our incentives to reduce the budget, and they were there, and then all of a sudden we don't have those in those positions. It's not a matter of that we had them for this job opening for many years and just never filled it. So I think I'm always interested in, I believe every position that I'm looking at under the vacancy savings was a result of SIP. Is that correct?
That's a fair statement, yes.
Okay. So they were positions, real positions, until we incentivized folks to retire and take
Right.
that advantage.
Yep. And that happened in 2013 as part of the 2013 2.0 budget. That's when that occurred. So.
Mr. Henry?
But as I understand it, though, those positions are still real positions, though, correct? They're not those are still real positions. They just have not been filled, and they were part of the vacancy savings.
In the past, as part of this budget book, the recommendation is for those positions not to be in here because of the way we did the bookkeeping methodology. It caused some confusion. Some council members had told us they didn't like the way we were doing the bookkeeping. Some department directors weren't sure if they could fill positions or not fill positions. So there was always a lot of confusion around them. So that's why that decision was made.
Can I just add to the answer? Sorry, follow up on that. From my point of view, I don't know that for me, it really didn't matter what you call the position or how it got there. It was either funded or not funded. And my conversation, and part of the conversations I know the different departments want to talk about those positions, was if it's a position that is warranted and you all want to fund it, let's put it in the budget. If not, it's kind of floating around and in and out, and sometimes people, when I got here, they told me they had a position and didn't have a position, and in one case somebody wanted to spend the money twice, and I just thought that was a little too confusing. If it's warranted, let's put it in there so we know what we're dealing with, and if not, then so be it. Just like we do everything else, just like we do for cars, just like we do for equipment, just like we do for supplies. And as I said at the beginning, that doesn't mean that just because it's not there that those aren't needed. I know a lot of those important safety positions particularly probably are warranted, and I think that's a discussion you all need to have. And I know the departments are ready to have that discussion, explain to you the need there.
Mr. Mikhailovich?
Thank you for that explanation, and I agree with the direction we're headed with that. The second question has to do with this end-of-year balance, fund balance, the $1 million surplus. Is that more like the result of revenues or more the result of expenditures, our staff holding down expenditures, or a combination thereof?
Yeah, first I'd like to just make sure, so those watching at home and everyone, we're not certain that it'll be $1 million at the end of the year, but I think it's a little bit of both. I think the revenues are coming in ahead of where we had projected them and budgeted for them to come in, and I think many of the departments have done a very good job of holding down the expenses the best that they can in order. So there are several large expense areas where we've not spent as much money as was budgeted, but at the same time there's several revenue areas where we're projecting them to come in much higher. So.
And from the Finance Committee, I remember that we might finish up with between 700 and 900,000, something like that.
Yeah, currently it's over $1 million is what's on revenue side that we're estimating to come in above what was budgeted for the year. So.
All right. Thank
But
you.
we also know that there's some expenses.
Yes. All right. Bill, are we ready to go to the police budget? Chief, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councilman Bray. First, let me introduce Lauren Maddox. She's the Police Department Fiscal Affairs Technician, and she knows more about our budgets, and we have 5, than I do. So I may refer to her or pause for a moment and get you the right answer. So between the two of us, we should be fine. Let me tell you that our process began in April, so we're now in the 5th month of the 2015 budget process. I asked for feedback from my command staff. Then Lorna and I went through the 5 budgets individually, line item by line item. We then had 2 meetings with Steve and Bill, I think the 2nd week of May. That was followed up with the preparation of a written response to additional questions that Steve had regarding our budgets. And so it's been a very thorough process. This is the 16th year in the city of Jefferson that I've been involved in it. And each one is a little bit different, but I believe that this was as thorough a process and review as I've experienced here in this city. Of course, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and answer your questions or respond to your observations. Steve made it clear that he wanted an honest assessment and to be clear about things. So there were some good things, I'd like to think more good things in the budget in spite of the restraints and constraints that we have than negative things. But as I look at these budgets, and I'm told to be brief about this, I don't think it'll be too hard, and I really will try to be brief, because when we begin the process, we're basically at status quo. We look at what we did last year when there were significant cuts made, line item by line item. So that was our beginning point. We, if you notice, suggested quite a few reductions in these various line items because now not large amounts, but nevertheless we felt we could reduce a line item by $1,000 here or $1,500 there or $2,000 there, trying to make an honest assessment of this, knowing the city was suffering from reduced revenues, and so we tried to contribute, be a part of meeting that balanced budget objective. Two things, I guess I'll start with two concerning things, and that would be the 3 SIP positions that weren't funded. 2 of those are in our records section. We presently have, or we had 5 full-time positions in the records section and 2 part-time positions. So we now have 3 full-time positions and 2 part-time positions. So far, we're doing okay. What we did was we increase the number of hours our 2 part-time people work to the maximum 29 hours a week. That's to stay under the 1,500 hour a year benchmark for part-time people. So that additional 20 hours, or 18 hours actually, has helped and made a big difference. I will tell you though, we don't know what position we're going to be in 3 months or 6 months or next year in responding to our workload. Right now we're okay. But I'm not comfortable with that looking into the future. The other is the police officer position. Of course, every position is important to us, as you would imagine. I will say that if the position is not funded, and again, I understand and respect your dilemma and the task that you have before you. That being said, of course, without that police officer position, I will cut a position from one of our special units. That would be either the community action team, the traffic unit, the community service unit, or detective section. So that's where that position would come from. Of course, we haven't concluded the process, so we don't know if the position will be in or out of the budget, but that is where the cut will be made. As far as the training money, Bill discussed that briefly. We have no training funds in the general fund budget. So we're using what we call the $3 training fund that comes from both the municipal court and the Department of Public Safety, state of Missouri. The state of Missouri sends us a check annually, and the municipal court sends us a check monthly. That probably amounts to $15,000 to $20,000 a year the funds that we receive annually. So you can see if we spend $60,000 from the existing fund, it's not going to replenish itself at the necessary rate. So we're saying we can do this another year, but in 2016, or for the budget year 2016, we won't have that resource anymore. It will be gone. And of course, the necessity of training in a police department is another discussion. We have so many certifications and licenses we have to meet. We have the continuing education hours that have to be met by each sworn officer, and so the demands are great. So that is a concern for 2016. We'll manage in 2015. We're very pleased with the inclusion of our police captain. There are 3 police captains, each command a division within the police department. We were forced to hold that vacancy, or that position vacant, since Captain Sanova's retirement in April of 2013. The funding of that position, I can't tell you how important that is, so we're extremely pleased with that. That was the most important position of all the positions that were vacant, and it's now presently in the budget. We need that type of leadership at that position. Those are people that serve as the interim chief when I'm not available, or the acting chief. So very pleased with that. Also very pleased with the cars. They managed, Bill and staff managed to find two sources of funding, a sales taxi and the general fund. Our police cars, we're driving longer than we have since the first few years I was here. We have over 100,000 miles on those cars. Those are hard-driven miles, as you can imagine, responding to emergency calls for service, and many of them are driven many hours a day beyond 8. So that's important to get those 9 patrol cars and 1 animal control truck. We had asked for 2 trucks. We're pleased to have 1 truck. We'll manage with that 1 new truck with optimism for the future. And then I want to reiterate the importance of the raise. Our employees are extremely hopeful that that will remain in the budget. It's important to them. Certainly in my 16 years, the first time we didn't get a raise, and it's just something that 2% means more than you might think. You know, if nothing else, it's an acknowledgement of their good work, and the holiday is also something that they appreciate and hopefully will remain. We submitted 1 pink sheet this year, and that's for the HVAC system. As you know, we've had a need for a new HVAC system for many years. Of course, the funding is kind of up in the air. We're working with Britt and our engineers with the city to try to pin down the amount of money that would be necessary and the best system for our building. That's yet to be done, but they're still working. We had an individual looking at our facility this week to that end, and hopefully we're getting closer to know how much that will cost us. But that is our 1 pink sheet. And finally, I will point out that in an effort to keep the overtime down, we give compensatory time pretty significantly in our department. We will average about, well, over let's say 525 hours every pay period of overtime, and we will comp at about 40% of that. That's a real good average. Every 2 weeks, about 40% of those hours are comped or put on the books. Eventually, of course, that will runs up the bill because those are hours owed. But I just want to make that point that with the amount of overtime that we receive, while we appreciate it, it's not close to being sufficient to pay our employees. So our supervisors have done a very good job of giving compensatory time in lieu of the overtime, thereby allowing us to remain within our budgetary constraints in that line item. So just to note that those hours continue to grow on the books at quite a few thousand hours a year with the present situation that we're in. So that would be my brief summary, and be happy to respond to your questions.
Let's start with Mr. Henry.
Thank you, Councilman Bray. Chief, just based off of your report, from a personnel standpoint, do you really, and I know these particular positions were part of the SIP program at the time, can you really afford to lose that police officer position? Because that really concerns me.
Well,
based off of you having to possibly move around another officer from another division.
Well, I know Steve always says you have to prove that you need an officer. So what I would say to that is, if I have to take the officer from one of those specialized units, will the citizens of our city see a reduction in police service? I don't think they will. But if we take an officer from our community action team, there's less officers to neighborhood problem solve. From the traffic unit, less enforcement activities. You can judge for yourself what difference that makes in traffic safety. Detectives, you take one or from that position, then the caseload increases, and that puts an added burden on the detectives that remain, and the community service unit are basically our school officers. So that would be after discussions with Dr. Mitchell, because they contribute 50% of 5 of our school resource officers. So no, we don't like to lose police officer positions. That's just the honest truth. Again, I respect your dilemma, and will respond in the manner the council expects us to.
Maybe, can I just add to that, and tell me if I'm wrong, but there's certainly a service level component to that, and there's a process that you can go through to identify what appropriate staffing may be. And police officers have a significant amount of their time, which is proactive time, which we want. You're working in the community, driving around, not just responding to calls. And that's important, and I've seen that in this community where it's been a big benefit to have that time. So sometimes that proactive time gets changed and reduced, and so you still have police officers that are responding to a lot of calls, but that proactive time, sometimes you don't see that if that goes away, and that's important. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Follow up?
Follow up. And then also the 2 records positions. If either one of those, or if both of those are cut, do you see your that particular division getting behind at any point, or are they behind now based off of these 2 positions being in the being a part of the SIP program?
I ask our records personnel, different individuals, about every couple of weeks for many months, how are we doing? And the assessment has been, we're hanging in there, we're doing okay, but there's always a sense of apprehension of we don't know what the future holds, because the demands aren't decreasing, and I don't think one can expect to reduce the section by 40% and be too effective. Now, IT personnel have helped us with the advent of a lot of different, IT kinds of systems and software and all those kinds of things. It makes some difference, but I think we're in the learning mode right now of just how long we'll be able to maintain, status quo where we're at now. I really appreciate our part-time people. I've asked each one individually if they would continue to work the 29 hours a week. The original agreement was 20. And they both eagerly said we'd be happy to continue to help. That's made a big difference. I foresee a need in the future, but to sit here now and say we're way behind, I can't do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Graham?
Can I just add something?
Okay, go ahead.
I know it's just a matter of semantics, and I don't see those positions as being cut. I see them as not being added because they weren't there before. But I understand the point. Like I said, it's just a matter of semantics. But
All right, Mr. Graham.
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Bray, but certainly I'll just ask a couple and then I'll go to the next council person because I know that he or she may have some more questions as well. First of all, Chief, I want to say thank you for looking at your budget line by line to see what can be cut and what can be held over. So I want to say, first of all, compliment you on doing that.
You're welcome.
I guess my first question is, how many officers do you have, sworn officers do you have in your department total?
89.
89. And right now, how many are we short, or should I say, how many of those positions are not filled?
So you're excluding military leave and
Right.
physical.
Right. Yeah, how many do we need to
issues and things.
do this last pool that we just had?
I think it's 9.
Okay, 9. Okay. And I know we're talking about this one position.
Excuse me, Councilman, that includes the SIP positions.
Okay. And I know we're talking about this one position, and I'm certainly, like Councilman Henry, I'm very concerned about, I want to say, not funding a position, but making sure that all the positions are filled within the Department of Public Safety as a whole, making sure we have a balanced budget first and foremost. But whenever we're talking about public safety, then certainly that raises an eyebrow for me, and I want to make sure that we are funding those positions. So I know we're looking at 9 police cars, and 5 of those coming out of general fund and 4 out of sales tax E. If we could, are those something that is required because it's a safety issue, or is it because of something that we think we need because other cars just got a lot of miles on it? And the reason why I'm asking that is I'm trying to figure out how can we fund this one position that possibly may not be funded, because I would hate for us to have all these cars and not enough people to drive the cars. And so I'm trying to figure out how can we possibly fund this position if we have 9 police cars we're about to purchase at a few $100,000, I'm sure. So if you could,
That's a good question.
if you could help me to understand that one.
Mileage is just kind of a superficial way of looking at it. I mean, but it is reflective of safety. I mean, these are hard-driven cars, and these are also the offices. You know, the officers work their 10-hour duty day in those vehicles. So I don't have before me the maintenance records. I have a couple of individuals, command officers, that are responsible for fleet management. We would certainly be able to look at that and be more explicit with you about the needs for those. I point out the mileage because it generally is reflective of safety, and maintenance continues to increase in those things. So I just can't, I'm sorry, I can't be too specific about. That's probably the best I could do right now. I see what you're saying, though.
Yeah.
You know.
Because I would have a very hard concern trying to explain to the citizens of Jefferson that we have funded 5 new police cars out of general funds, and we are steady saying that we're short with an area like police and fire.
Right.
I would have a very hard time, and I think the rest of the council members would too, trying to explain how we're short on personnel for safety, but we just purchased a lot of brand new vehicles.
Right.
So that one, I just hope that we can find a way to fund this position. And the last thing I'm going to say is that I was in court on last Wednesday, not because I had to be here, but I usually come on Wednesday just to see, you know, what the crowd is like and things like that. And I did observe the room was packed, normally like it is on Wednesday, you know, pretty much standing room only. And I noticed that when I looked around, I didn't see a police officer or a bailiff that was there. And so I came to the front and asked the city prosecutor, you know, where's the police officer? And he did say that there was not a police officer in the courtroom on last Wednesday, and it was because we were short-handed. And certainly that had me concerned as well, too. So I don't know how those officers work during court. I know we talked about them having like a lot of overtime hours on the books and things like that. But I think at some point, if we keep doing that, we're going to burn those officers out to where, you know, it's going to be like, you know, they're going to want to leave because they're burnt out, because they're getting the comp time, but it's nothing like having another body there. If they would like to take off, then they can. So
I think we,
right there.
and Drew can address that, but there is a retired officer who is a reserve officer who typically staffs court, and he was unavailable, you know, and maybe on that particular day, but recently, last week, this week, 2 weeks ago, I don't know the exact dates. And so there was a request made, could you have an officer or officers come by? We simply had all our officers busy on calls for service, could not help them. I think we provided that explanation to the court. You know, generally we supplement that individual with our officers as we can.
Drew, did you want to follow up?
Yeah,
on
I was
this
just going to say, Captain Sanova, retired Captain Sanova is our court bailiff. He just happened to be on vacation that week, as retired folks sometimes do, but he's there other weeks.
Before I recognize Mr. Scrivener, I'm going to recognize the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for being late. These positions, I've had a chance to talk to a lot of individuals that are on our public safety departments, and it's a good thing about being the mayor of a small town is that I mean, we know each other. I've ridden with these people through the years. Our kids are friends in school. Their kids are at my house. Our kids are at their house. I'm sure they've probably stopped one of my daughters, and I just don't know it yet. But, I mean, we know each other. We're a small town. So When the SIP idea first came about and the idea of cutting these positions, I heard quite a bit from both departments of fire and police. I think there's no doubt that we're all proud of the work that all of our public safety departments do. And I think the extra positions, from what I've been told, can help our staff members in public safety. When it comes to trying to take a much-needed holiday, an extra person on board obviously helps that rotation and what can be done. Not only that, but actually being able to take a day off as opposed to having to work on their own days off. And as the chief mentioned, and as we all know, even the new council members, the lengthy recruitment process that we currently have with our police officers, I think one more person, one more body on the force would probably help that. So obviously the people I've talked to within the community and the people within the department, I think they'd like to see at least one of those positions in the fire department and also the police department restored and budgeted and obviously hired and not a vacancy savings position. The budget I gave you obviously didn't have that in it. I didn't have the fortitude of all the knowledge and whatnot that I've heard over the last couple of weeks at that time. I'd be more than happy to help you through that process. But I think as you can find ways to save money in the budget, saving room for those public safety positions should be a high priority.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Scrivener?
Thank you. You'd think I'd know that now. When on the comp time, I think you probably explained this to us before, and maybe Gail will have to help you a little bit. I don't know, but if I'm understanding you correctly tonight, you said those hours continue to grow. So those hours, I would presume, are kind of like they're being banked and they're not all used, so they roll over from year to year.
Yes, sir.
And I think it's, I recall from a previous budget conversation that not only do they roll over from year to year, but they, at the time that someone leaves or retires or whatever, they get paid. Is
Yes,
that correct?
That's correct.
And they don't necessarily, they may accrue those hours as an officer or patrolman, we'll say. I'm not sure what the correct title is, but
Either.
okay. But they may leave as a sergeant or leave as a captain or what have you. And do they get paid at the rate at which they were accumulated or at the rate at which they retire?
At the rate at which they are when they retire.
So not only, I mean, there could be a fairly significant inflationary action that occurs over someone like Captain Sonova, for instance. The long career he had be quite a costly thing.
We have established a maximum number of hours that they can accumulate, but over the last 2 years that my maximum has increased out of necessity, because if I don't increase it, then we all of a sudden have to pay those hours, and we just didn't have the money to pay them. So we're now up to about 230 hours is my present maximum.
230?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And along with the salary that is comped, I presume that vacation time and accrual toward pension and all of those things are expenses that, even though they're not paid out in form of cash, they will at some point in time be paid out.
They will
cash.
be, yes.
Okay.
And a certain percentage of sick leave.
Okay. You said something earlier that I wish you'd clarify, if you would, please. You said that if the police officer position is not restored, then you would have to cut a position from a special unit. But that, I mean, you're operating without that police officer now, so there wouldn't be an additional cut. Have you already made a cut?
Well, alluding to the 2013 the 12 status. I mean, when we had the 89 officers, there were a certain number of officers assigned to all the different units besides the patrol section, the black and whites that respond to calls. So then with the advent of SIP, we haven't filled those two positions, two sworn positions, captain and patrol officer. What I meant to say is if they aren't, this position is not funded, then the 89 goes to 88, and all 88 are assigned somewhere. There will be one less assigned to one of those units.
So if we fund it, you'll actually be adding someone to a special unit?
No, sir, we'd be returning to the original staffing level.
But I think for the purpose of this budget, I think we've all agreed we're not going to base our discussion on numbers that we've had in the past. So I guess starting with what you currently have today, which unit did you cut someone from whenever you lost that officer?
Well, we had some attrition. With the advent of SIP, I had 9 people retire last year. We averaged about 2. So that kind of dug a hole from the staffing point. So there wasn't a necessity to literally identify a position that we would eliminate or not staff, because we were significantly short as a result of all the retirements and normal attrition. So it's not been necessary. I think, if you will, if you'd refer to like our organizational chart, which I think you have,
Right.
What I mean is when it reflects the 89 sworn positions and that position's not funded, next year's organizational chart will reflect 88 positions, and there'll be -1 somewhere on that organizational chart.
So this chart, as it exists in the book tonight, actually still reflects the number prior to SIP.
It reflects the authorized positions in the police department. So if we were fully staffed, there would be someone as reflected everywhere on that chart. But that rarely happens.
So for instance, community action team officers, now it shows 5 here. Do you have 5 community action team officers that are serving?
No, sir.
How many do you have?
I believe we have 3.
That's what I was thinking. Okay, so, and I'm not going to go through every one of these and do that, but I could probably go through here then, for instance, if I go over here to the records clerk, wherever they are. Here we go, records section. You've got 1 administrative technician, 3 information clerks, and 2 PT part-time clerks. So which one of those numbers represents, which one of these numbers do I need to change to represent today's reality?
Well, I thought it reflected 4 information clerks. I don't know if that's a
Well, there are 2
typo.
part-time and then 4, 1 administrative technician and 3 clerks. So that would be 4 plus 2. And you have your 2 part-time now, you said?
Yes, we do.
And you have...
And we have 3 information clerks. We have no supervisor, and we had 4 information clerks.
Okay. So I guess one question that I would ask you to kind of enlighten us a little bit is your mobile data terminals. I must admit I don't know exactly how that process works and how that has assisted you, but it was my understanding that some of the manual process of filling out tickets and so forth has now been automated due to those mobile data terminals. And wouldn't it stand to reason that maybe as more has been computerized that you might have less?
I think that's why we're doing okay, because we have 3 and 2 part-time people, and so far we're just apprehensive about the future. We don't want to kind of become complacent or make an assumption that we're just fine, everything's just hunky-dory. I don't know, but I think that those things that you allude to did make a difference, and that's how we've managed for over a year to function too short.
But on the other hand, one of the reasons that it's difficult to fund these clerks is because there is so much money. I think I saw that now we're going to pay for air cards, and that's almost the cost, or at least a portion of the cost of a clerk. And so when you do shift to technology, it's unfortunate, but a lot of times that has a tendency to replace human beings.
Oh, in expense too. I mean, there's a lot of associated expense, but what I mean to suggest to the council is we're apprehensive and don't want to eliminate the possibility of needing another clerk. I am not saying that we want 2 clerks.
Right.
We're doing okay, but an additional clerk may become necessary in the future. But I don't think we're going to need to replace both of them.
And one last thing, and then I'll yield. This HVAC, I know we talked about that quite a bit in the past, and I was under the impression that we said that needs to be done, let's get it done. I thought we'd said, get us some numbers, we want to get it fixed. And I thought that was almost a year ago, and we haven't. Is there a reason?
Well, there have been a number of meetings, and as I said, I appreciate the effort our engineers have done they have a person on whom they're relying, and we've had quite a few meetings, and we had someone in the building, so, specifically why it's taken so long, I think we know we don't have the funding, and so I think we're being careful, and we want to get the right system for our building for the long term, and then as funding may be identified and become available, we'll be ready to proceed, and I think that's what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Costales.
Oh, thank you, Councilman Bray. First of all, I want to thank all the staff for answering those nasty emails I sent. I know I went detailed line item by line item through everybody's budget, and you guys answered all my questions. Thank you very much. Chief, you mentioned on overtime about 525 hours per pay period, so that's going to equate to about 1,000 hours a month?
Yes, sir.
So about 12,000 a year?
Well, it's actually more than, it's probably 14,000 a year.
So
without having the numbers in front of me, but Lauren provides a bi-monthly or twice a month summary by employee, by the type of overtime, what they were doing to generate that overtime, and then a breakdown of the percentage of compensatory time and overtime, and she does a real good job with that, so I think it's probably about 14,000.
Yeah. I'm not questioning that.
Yeah.
Just doing the math with you. And looking on the budget here, on the pay sheet, I looked and found the lowest pay, and with all the benefits added in, it comes to about 50,000 a year. And toward the bottom, there's some overtime down there that totals about about 170,000.
That would be, I think, our line item amount.
Yeah.
Absent
But when we
grants.
go all the way to the far right and we total it with all the benefits, we got about 225,000 there in overtime. And I know we'll never eliminate all the overtime.
No, sir.
But if we could cut that down, we could free up a lot of that money maybe to hire 3 or 4 officers and reduce the overtime we're paying out. Is that even conceivable?
Overtime, and we created a list of reasons overtime is generated. It's a pretty long list, and it has a lot of items on there that are unavoidable. You can't avoid court, court testimony, and of course there's the 2-hour rule. So if any officer is asked to return for court, special assignment, a meeting, it's 2 hours because it takes time out of their day, and that's just a fair way, an equitable way of computing. And so we have court, for instance. We have a lot of special assignments. We have close to 200 special events that I review every year. We have warrants that need to be served, search warrants, SWAT kinds of activities. A lot of times the officers receive a significant type of report within the last hour of their duty day. It's too important to go home, and the next shift is not ready to go to work, and so they may be there another 3 or 4 hours, throw a dart, whatever hours it takes to satisfactorily investigate whatever matter we're investigating. So reducing overtime is, quite frankly, very difficult to do because there's so much absolutely out of our control.
I understand. I was just trying to find some money.
Yeah, and we could provide a list of all those reasons we get we get the overtime, but I think you'd see that if you looked at the list too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief, the school resource officers, I think, did I see, are there 6?
Well, there's 5 that are strictly school resource officers.
Do you remember when we had one? How long ago was it?
It was about 1998.
Okay, so 16, so a few years later, we
Yes,
have
sir.
5. Is there any cost sharing involved with that?
Yes, sir. The school district pays 50% of that program. We're very pleased, and we have a great relationship.
All right, thank you. Also, on that HVAC, a little follow-up, I see in the documents here, the estimated cost is up to $1 million, but $500,000 to $1 million.
Yes, sir.
So on a good day, we might come back with just a $500,000.
That'd be a way of looking at it.
Actually,
We've got an engineer on. We're looking at getting a good answer on what the alternatives are and the costs associated with those, and then we'll come back to you when we get that. So I don't know all the history about why it took so long, but we're getting some good cost estimates.
it's been studied well, and it's a timely process. And we're replacing a mechanical system and the ductwork, I believe.
It pretty much has
It's
to
all
be
being considered.
gutted.
I don't know what the option is. That's what we're looking at.
Right.
There may be some other options.
We're winding down on the police end of tonight's meeting. Does anyone have any questions? Chief, will you remain available this evening if we need to come back to you?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Grant?
I guess this would be for, probably for HR. I know Chief said about the 2 part-time workers that he have. Moving forward, the 2 part-time and records, moving forward, how would those 2 part-time positions play with the Affordable Care Act? Because I know that you work so many hours, and what savings, is there a savings moving forward with the Affordable Care Act? Because you still have to provide insurance. I know sometimes people hire part-time workers to work so many hours, you don't have to pay certain benefits and things like that. But moving forward, is it really going to be a cost savings if we keep the part-time workers on?
As long as we keep them at the 29 hours or less per week, we're okay. It would fall under the threshold for having to give them benefits.
So the 2 we have now, they don't get benefits?
They do not get benefits.
Okay.
I'm sorry I didn't make that clear, but that's the reason for that benchmark of not going over the 29 hours in 1 year.
And I guess just a response to Councilman Costales, I know you talked about the overtime and trying to cut on overtime, but I know would probably be a lot of overtime towards the end of this year based on the case in which the officers are working now. I'm sure they're still working. I mean, it was out at the compost site and things like that. You can't account for things that happen like that. So I think the overtime would have to, is most definitely going to be there. And so I'm pretty sure as we look at the last of this year's of overtime, it's probably going to be a little bit higher based on that, not saying that one case, but cases like that. So you're going to have overtime.
It's definitely a great example, not that that is typical. It is not typical, but it does happen. You can't anticipate that.
Mr. Mihalovich?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd heard that we have a plan, or we're in the process of getting a plan for the HVAC system, and so I'm good with that, and I look forward to us trying to find ways to pay for that down the road. As a matter of record, as I was told by past Councilman Bob Weber, if you're going to ask for some revenue, some expense, you have to have something offset revenue or something. So I hate to break that rule, but I'm prepared to at least put something on the line for now. But before I do that, I need to find out what would be the cost estimate of an officer.
Give us one moment, we'll be able to give that to you.
Okay.
Yeah,
So while they're getting that number,
I have it, if you're ready.
yeah.
The cost estimate of one officer would be $53,292. And that's benefits, salary, the taxes, yeah, stuff that goes into that.
That would include equipment? You said it includes equipment?
What, and I appreciate Councilman Graham in looking at the cars and the sales tax E. Maybe we can shift and do something so you're working on the right way. Is that if we're going to propose some cost, we got to offset that. So I've kind of proposed to this group that we go ahead and put as a placeholder, and that puts more minus up there, the cost of one officer as a placeholder under that expenses at this point, and then that we would have our deliberations, and it may go off. It may, if we can't find the revenue to pay for it. I make that in the form of a motion.
I second that.
Would you state your motion again, please?
To include the cost of hiring the police officer at $53,000 on our worksheet as a placeholder.
And it's seconded by Mr. Graham. And we have Mr. Prather. Oh, all right.
In regard to that, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Scrivener?
Would you estimate what the cost of equipping that officer be as well? Because I think we should put that up there as well.
If I might, we would try to absorb that into the existing line items that provide for those things.
The cost of
The equipment, yes, sir.
So you would have a car to assign the officer?
Well, we presently are driving our cars more years. That was a new program developed about 1.5 years ago to assign cars to specific officers, so there's more accountability, and hopefully they're well kept and would last more than the 3 years that we had been driving them, and so it wouldn't require another car. Short answer is the program is designed for that number of officers already.
All right, Mr. Hussey?
I don't disagree with that happening. I guess I wonder if right now is the right point. I know you're kind of saying a placeholder, but it's my understanding in this budget process when we start to make motions at this point to add things to that spreadsheet, really what we're doing is amending the budget. We're not putting it as a placeholder to come back and talk about it, but the form of that motion tonight is to amend the budget, and that if we do not go back and take action later on, that's in the budget. And so I guess I don't disagree, and I think that, you know, I will be in favor of that at some point, but I kind of wonder if we shouldn't wait to do some of these things until we've heard from other departments on the budgets, and so that we can look at positions and things that need to be added in a larger context of all city departments. You know, I'm not opposed, I guess, if we kind of have a working spreadsheet individually on the side and kind of know what things are. My concern is by the formal action tonight, what we're actually doing is proposing an amendment to the budget, and I don't know if we're ready to do that until we've heard from all department directors.
Thank you to provide my input on that. I came in tonight, and for the next few evenings as we have questions and answers with department directors, I'm not really expecting motions, but rather question and answer and information gathering, and then letting it digest, and then, like you say, eventually start to see the bigger picture, and things start to fall into place. Now, of course, the committee is free to act and make motions as they feel appropriate and needed. Mr. Prather, on the motion.
Well, is there a procedure otherwise, you know, for example, putting it on the parking lot, besides making a motion, I guess, is to follow up on Ken's point?
Not necessarily.
Or
I assume that we would be enjoying the question and answer period tonight and for the next few nights. But, you know, there is no plan. If it's the committee's wish to entertain a motion and accept a budget with an amendment, with an alteration, we're free to do that. Also, we can listen to the questions and answers over the next few days, and then look at the budget as a whole and see what adjustments could be made.
That kind of answered my question. My question is really do we have to make a motion to get it on the parking lot?
My preference would be to wait, to digest this information and to wait and then come together after we have all the presentations and have a feel for the bigger picture. I don't know that my approach is the best approach, though. Mr. Scribner?
I would just say that every year until last year, I think we followed a process of what we called a parking lot, whether that's the best or not. And in action, even though we didn't do it in terms of label, we've really used the parking lot process last year as well. So, I mean, every year I've been on doing budgets, we have, in essence, whether you call it placeholder or parking lot or whatever, made those motions. And the reason that we did it that way is because it shows you, every time you put something up there, it throws you out of balance by a certain amount, and it gives you a visualization that there's a consequence of adding something or taking something off, and you see that consequence right up there on the board for all to see.
Mr. Scribner, I remember that too, and that worked for me well at that time also. You remember if any council member could place something on the parking lot, or did it?
I think last year we said, and I don't know that I agreed that we should have to do it that way, but last year I think we said if you put something on, you have to take something off. For me, I wasn't as comfortable with doing it that way, but I see it as just really kind of giving you the opportunity to create a list and decide what your priorities are. And if we have a police officer up there and we have to look through the budget to find some place to cut something in order to fund that police officer, it gives us that visual opportunity to see what it is that we're, what we're proposing, and look for places to cut it. So I like that process, whether we do it tonight or we wait and do it later. I kind of like doing it as we go along because it kind of lets me know what Councilman Mahalovich is thinking and what Councilman Ward or whoever might be thinking is a priority for them, and so I can be kind of getting my head around that.
Mr. Betts, can you keep track of the parking lot process?
Absolutely. We have it on the board, and your discussion is pretty, that's how it's been done in the past as well. So
I'd like to follow up on Bob's.
Excuse me?
Can I follow up on Bob's point?
Yes, Mr. Prather.
I guess it's going to be understood in these motions that if we don't find the money, they come back off the parking lot.
Well, eventually...
I guess I just understood, because you have to find the money, obviously, so this is just a wish list, I'm assuming that we would like.
A wish list would be another good name for it. Mr. Mahalovich, would your motion be to place it on the parking lot?
Yes, I'm amenable to that. I don't know where my second was.
Mr. Graham?
So I guess if we were going to do it like this, and if we had to find where we was going to make the cuts from, could we do it at that point to start making it at zero instead of the minus?
Well, that's what I didn't like about it last year, is because it kind of forced you to go in and cut something now before we'd even had a chance to talk about it. I think if we go through here and come up, let's say we come up, after we listen to all department directors, we come up with a list of 10 items that, as we go through, that we think, then I mean, it's going to really be tough to go in and try to find those cuts. But at least it forces us to talk about it and go and look. And I think we should probably, someone touched on it, I guess you did, Councilman Graham, you in essence asked the chief, is it more important to the chief to have the cars or more important to him to have the officer? And we may have to ask other department directors the same thing. You know, you're asking for more than what we are able to fund, so what are you willing to maybe give up in order to get this? Is this more important to you than what you've already agreed to? So, you know, but I'm good with the idea of putting that up there, and then that forces us to dig in and try to find money somewhere.
As part of, how to mention this as part of the motion and the process, let's adopt the parking lot process, and we'll do it with a motion and a second and a majority vote of the committee. And,
Mr. Chairman.
At such time, I do not want to, I would rather not, however, at that time require, an offset in the budget at that time. So to place something on the parking lot would simply require a motion, a second, and a majority vote of the committee. Mr. Hussey?
Just clarification. I need a little bit of clarification then. Just the motion is to put it on a parking lot. The motion is not then to amend the proposed budget.
No.
So therefore, all of the actions we place on the parking lot will require another vote before to actually amend the budget. I just want to clarify that.
Absolutely.
And make sure that's
the
the understanding of
process.
everybody. This is just putting it on a parking lot.
Just putting it on the parking lot.
Okay.
Mr. Best?
And if a majority would oppose this idea, if there's already 6 council people sitting here that knows that later on they're not going to vote to fund this, they don't want to look for the money, then they would right now turn it down. It wouldn't be put on the parking lot. It wouldn't be considered later. But if there's a majority agree to put it on there, then it'll be considered later. It's the way I mean, that's what we've done in the past.
That's what I expect also. Mr. Betts, does that sound like a workable?
Yes.
Any other questions on the motion to place this item on the parking lot? Madam Clerk, would you read the motion, please?
To include the cost of a police officer at $53,292 as a parking lot item.
Any other discussion? If not, Madam Clerk, would you take the vote, please?
Branch,
Aye.
Bray,
Aye.
Costalis,
Aye.
Graham,
Aye.
Henry,
Aye.
Hussey,
Aye.
Mahalovich,
Aye.
Prather,
Aye.
Scrivener,
Aye.
Ward. Aye.
Passes. Mr. Prather?
Question for Bill. Bill, you'd explained during the last budget session we had some costs associated with this day off holiday. Can you explain that for me, please?
Sure, I can explain that. For the holiday, there is 2 different areas. It's in police and the fire department, where we guarantee holiday pay to those individuals because they cannot take that day off. So they're working during those times. So we calculate what the cost is of each holiday. We know what that is. There's certain levels of holiday pay, like in the fire department. Fighters get a certain amount, and then the assistant chiefs get a little lower, fewer hours. So same way in the police department, there's certain levels that get to pay, and then there's other levels that don't. So we have a calculated amount. The total amount probably is your question.
Yes.
And I will certainly find it. It's $60,684.46.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any more questions of the chief before we transition over to fire? If not, let's take a moment and transition over to fire. I believe we're going to we'll bring Chief Schofield up here.
Thank you, Chief Schrader.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. While we do that, I'd also like to compliment the staff on this arrangement. I think this will work well. Let's just take 5 minutes. We'll come back in 5 minutes. All right.
Is that automatic,
Mr. Curl, do you have any comments before we
No,
turn the
not-
microphone over? Okay.
I think it's good.
All right. We're going to start fire department. Chief, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to introduce also a few of the folks that I have with me tonight. Division Chief Jason Turner, who is also our acting interim chief for the last 18 months. So as you know, he spent a lot of the time in the formulation of this budget and a lot of the previous discussions that have occurred. And then also Kathy Lubert, our administrative assistant, who also does a lot of our administrative type stuff, especially with bills and the budget and that kind of thing. So I won't spend too much time in an overview. I know you have most of those documents in front of you. I did also make a handout. I want to make sure everybody got that. Should be a front and back. Make sure you got both front and back. Tried to save some trees there. I didn't print it in color. Hopefully you're able to see. Yeah, there's a couple extra, I believe, back here if anybody needs to get one of those as well. So I think we'll just kind of jump right into it. And of course, if you have questions as we go on anything specific, but I know that staffing is probably one of the bigger concerns and questions that you probably have. So we'll jump into those issues. And as you can see, based on the handout, probably the first conversation we need to have is kind of how we do our staffing. I know it's kind of confusing for those folks who don't live it. The terms are, I guess, kind of maybe what has been mentioned already tonight, the authorized positions. If you're looking at the Jefferson City Fire Department apparatus staffing by shift, A, B, C, and C shifts. As you know, we run a 24/7, 365 operation. So pretty much that means that a third of your life as a firefighter is spent in that service at the fire station. So 1 day out of 3, depending on how you arrange the schedule. A lot of fire departments do it differently, but that's pretty much what it comes down to. So as you look there in the authorized and then the current and the minimum numbers, you can see it broken down by apparatus, by actual vehicle that they're riding on that day. So the authorized number is the total number, and then the current is where we're at right now, and the minimum is what we can't go below based on work agreement. And really, if we drop below that number, we would probably have to park the truck and shut it down for that operational period. So as you look at those numbers, you can see the highlighted numbers there where we are deficient based on the SIP program. Just like many other departments, it's already been mentioned, you can see there that we are 1 short on A shift and 1 short on C shift in terms of shift personnel. And as you can also read there at the bottom, that 19 number for each individual shift is what would then cause overtime to be incurred. So before we move past this, just want to make sure that everybody's kind of tracking with where we're at right now. Sure.
Mr.
For whatever reason, don't have to increase 19 officers on the shift, someone is going to
Right, somebody's got to be called back in to cover that vacancy
Okay.
and perform that function.
Okay, all right.
That's correct. Yes.
Mr. Mihalovich.
Remind me how how many days you're on, and then that also factors in how you calculate overtime as well, if I
Yeah.
remember right. Can you explain that?
That's going to be a tough one. Yes, we work a shift, off a shift, work a shift, then we're off for 4, and then back on. So that there's 3 days in a row of working, day on, day off, day on, day off, day on, then 4 days off. I know that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but what it ends up being is, like I said, a third of the days you're going to be at the fire station, whether that's holidays, weekends. It floats through all of those type of schedules. And there are other ways that people do it, and part of that is related to how the work agreement is written through Local 671, in that it ends up being about 56 hours a week, and there is an overtime clause in there that essentially pays for 1 overtime shift. It's, instead of being time and a half, it's time and a quarter. And there is also the 27-day cycle that we are aware of, but typically that's separate from the hours worked in constant manning. That would be if other overtime is incurred, and there's a lot of other FLSA type of things that might factor in there too.
Mr. Scrivener.
I presume that if you have need to call officers back in, you call in firefighter that, for instance, if you have a need in Station 3, you're going to call in someone that's already worked a shift at Station 3, or maybe they're off for some reason or whatever, you wouldn't cross stations?
No, we would cross stations.
You do cross stations?
Yeah, we do, and typically, it's a pretty tight operation that I think everybody knows most of the positions that they would be asked to fill.
All right. go
Okay,
ahead.
so if everybody's good with that, just kind of as a precursor to the other side of the page, we'll look at that in terms of the SIP program specifically. And in addition to the two open firefighter positions on both A and C shift, we also have an open administrative position, it's the training officer. And you can kind of see there how that breaks out. We have, in the absence of that training officer position being filled, we have kind of come up with some short-term solutions to that. We've pushed that down to some of the shift personnel. We call them shift training officers, and they receive a slight augment in their pay to serve in that special capacity, to kind of step up into that role and do that on a shift-by-shift basis. They also have some specialty skills that we ask them to teach to the rest of the department. So that training officer role, you can see there the displaced duties in addition to coordinating training would include infection control, exposure control, incident safety officer. That person was also managing our fleet and our facilities. So all those position duties we've delegated out, and in the short run have tried to compensate the best that we can to keep the ship moving in the right direction. I'll give you a moment to read through that, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain those.
Mr. Graham?
Just to try to make sure I understand this, I see as relates to overtime in the last two pay periods, which is 1 month, $12,931.
Right.
That is what's been paid due to the lack of two firemen?
Well, there's a couple things going on there. Partially, yes. As we have a lower number to pull from, there is an overtime expense that's incurred. Additionally, there's other things we can't plan for, like long-term sick leave. We have a couple of people that are doing some rehabilitation type stuff with a shoulder and some other issues, that are off for long-term. And sometimes those things, along with the vacancy that I created when I moved up, has just kind of created a perfect storm where we're below that 19 number. So whenever we have fewer people to fill that gap, it creates more overtime to keep that minimum 19 number on the trucks.
So with you moving up, we're 2 short or 3?
Well, we're technically 3 right now because we haven't hired for my position yet. The downstream position that was created by my vacancy moving up.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mr. Hussey?
Mr. Chairman, Chief Schofield, when you mentioned that you have fire department personnel with the absence of the training officer that are stepping up to getting a bump in pay for that service, did you mention what exactly or how much that step?
Yeah, it's a 4% incentive
It's a
that they
4%
receive, and so that affects their overall rate. But then we also have asked them in certain cases to work overtime to deliver that training. Sometimes it's really important for us from a consistency standpoint to have, whenever possible, someone who's a subject matter expert deliver that same training to all 3 shifts.
So follow up, that 4%, that's paid out every shift they work or solely? So if the training officer position were to be filled, would all of those individuals that have received that 4% bump up lose that 4% then in return to their
It would be my
salary?
preference to let them maintain it because there's enough workload there, but obviously that would be a decision that would be up to you guys to fund. But certainly that would be my preference for a lot of reasons. But it would give sometimes the individual officer, training officer, can't be everywhere at once on high hazard training where we do a lot of very complicated type skills. So you kind of need people in different places. So there's certainly enough work for them to do to continue in that role, which would be my preference, but I understand there's an offset in cost there we'd have to talk about.
Any other questions to this point? Mr. Mahal?
Thank you, Chief, for that explanation. I first want to acknowledge and recognize the outstanding job Interim Chief Turner did during his 18 months in putting together this budget. Appreciate your work. Interim Chief Turner, and I appreciate continue to work with us on our budget and such, and your time was valued. Chief, my question is a couple. One is, what you have on this sheet here is the cost of 1 training officer and 2 firemen, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So that would encompass all 3 SIP positions.
Gotcha. Okay, and then could you make a comment with regard to your obligation and our expense to the department with regard to special projects like Task Force 1 and such?
There's a lot of things that we're looking to do that I think in the industry would help our recruiting efforts in terms of folks that would come here and have opportunities. There's a variety of different things that we have focused more on lately than I think in the past, and some of those are plan review, inspection practices, but specialty teams is probably one of the things we haven't done as much, that I think there's a real desire of our personnel to be part of, and the task force is just one of those opportunities, because we're so close in proximity to the home agency. Fire departments from all over the state feed personnel to that organization, and it's a great experience in terms of opportunity for our folks to receive some of the best training available. It's also an opportunity for them to deploy and respond to disasters that are beyond what are normally part of fire department response, and gain that experience, and then bring that experience back to us. The best part about that is that when they're deployed, the city is reimbursed completely for the time that they're gone to backfill their position. And then typically the way we've done that in the past is the individual that's leaving, it goes on a leave no pay status, a special assignment, which is there's a status that the city administrator can authorize through the personnel policy manual. And then they're paid by the federal government while they're on deployment, and then that backfill money is filtered back into the city to make sure that all of our overtime expenses are recouped.
All right, proceed.
So as we go down through this list, you can see that our overtime costs are certainly up. The thing that we've struggled with, and I'm sure the question that most of you probably have, is what is the offset in overtime if we hire these 2 firefighter positions? And that's a really tough one to answer. We, in fact, I talked to Mr. Betts today, and I said, is there some algorithm out there that we can tap into that would give us, at least an idea? And so the best we can do is to show you some of our totals over time, and we can certainly talk about that, but I can just tell you that they're up. My estimates, basing on some of the previous, would be that, we're looking at probably somewhere between 15 to 20, maybe depending on the situation, up to 25% offset in that overtime expense, based on having that full staffing. Now it's a lot of other factors and conditions being met. So there's just so many variables that go into that when that overtime is incurred. Certainly there are other benefits, and as we move down through there, you've got a few of them listed here. The total number of personnel available, not only on shift at any given day, but also available off shift to call back in, which is a practice that we've used and will continue to use to make sure we have adequate resources to address a major incident that occurs. To get our folks back in quickly, staff up our reserve trucks, not only to address the incident, but then also to provide coverage for the rest of the city while that incident is ongoing. That's a critical function, because we know that medical emergencies like heart attacks continue regardless of the fact there could be a structure fire going on at the same time. We've got to be able to address all those incidents that could occur. So the other one there is that, as I think the mayor mentioned earlier, the ability for shift personnel to use accrued vacation time, and for our exempt positions to use some of their compensated time. That does become a big issue for our folks. We currently allow 2 people to be on vacation on any one day, and that may not sound like that bad a deal, but it gets locked up really quick, and it's really difficult for people to find the time and take the time that they've accrued. So that kind of becomes a morale issue at some point. Overall safety and effectiveness, we have certain numbers that we try to reach on the fire scene or any incident scene that we may function at. And then finally, there's some ISO requirements, and they're new ISO requirements that we're trying to meet and trying to exceed in some cases so that we can get the maximum number of points possible if we ever do another ISO evaluation, which we plan on doing at some point. So those are kind of some of the benefits to the staffing for firefighter. In terms of training officer, we've kind of touched on this briefly as well. The consistency is really the big thing, and it's something that's been identified by a lot of our own internal people between shifts to make sure that we have someone who is the point person, who's focused on training as their main and primary mission. A lot of those other duties and responsibilities, like we said, kind of a point of contact, as the police chief mentioned, and I would echo that we have never before had more certifications, licensure, proficiencies we're trying to stay up on than we do today. And part of that is that's what people expect from a modern fire department, and that's what we want to be able to deliver. The documentation in terms of the accreditation was one of our deficiencies in the last evaluation. We did receive some points, but there were more points that we could have received had we done a better job of tracking and documenting some of our activities. And then finally, I would just say an essential member of the command staff to respond to incidents and provide overhead management. We do a lot now, too, with how we manage incidents, and having that command role, that command presence has become a major emphasis for all fire departments industry-wide. I'd be happy to answer any questions on any of that.
Mr. Scrivener?
Chief, and you may have said, and I apologize, I'm not sure I was listening as carefully as I should have been, but did you say how long you've been without a training officer?
That was the 2013 SIP program.
So last year?
No, I'm sorry, 2012. Am I right about that? Yeah, 19 months, I guess.
And you've been handling it how over the past year?
We've delegated out those responsibilities to people already on shift. So we've managed it, I think, under the circumstances very well. But I would also say that it's been a very temporary and sometimes a struggle for us to do it effectively.
So you're proposing, because you have $77,000 here, you're proposing a officer be hired, a training officer, or you're proposing, because you said something about the 4% bump. So are you talking about having one of your currently employed officers, and I may be using the wrong term here, firefighters, officers are the same thing, I guess, but are you talking about hiring someone, a new person, or are you talking about having someone who is currently working for the department become the training officer?
I don't know that we've explored whether or not it would be an internal or an external job. I think that's something that we'd have to discuss as we went further.
It's a new position.
Yeah, because it's been
a new body. Wherever it comes from, it's an addition.
Right, because we lost one through the
correct.
SIP. Okay, so we hire, if it were approved, we would hire a new person. Now, you say that we need a one-time cost for a vehicle. Did the person who retired have a vehicle?
They did.
Was that assigned to someone else?
Yeah,
or?
it was reassigned as we asked some of these folks to do extra responsibilities. Some of our exempt folks, the assistant chiefs that we've asked them to do a lot of stuff on their days off, whether it's attend meetings, perform functions. And so by letting them have a vehicle that they can use to respond back and perform some of the traditional roles handled by the public education officer and training officer, because for 18 months we've only had an interim chief in those, really all three of those positions, they've been allowed to use vehicles to come back in quickly, respond quickly to incidents, as well as routine business.
So is it your intent then to continue to have those officers continue to have those vehicles, because that was something that changed,
right,
and was added, that was added cost. So this, you're not going to take that back now that they're not performing those extra duties.
We've actually taken one of those back to provide a vehicle for me to use during the daytime for routine business already. And then, so there's two vehicles. So whoever's on duty of those three, is using the command and control vehicle. And then the other two would be able to use the other two vehicles to perform those off-duty functions.
So they are assigned full-time, they take them home?
Yeah, that'd be my preference to continue that, just because we need them to respond very quickly with their gear and equipment and in a vehicle that can be used for that function.
Do you have any idea what that additional cost to the department was to assign those vehicles?
I don't. I think it was just fuel at that point because they weren't being utilized because the positions, really we had two positions administratively that weren't filled at that time, both the fire chief and the training officer.
But they will become ongoing expense because they will have to be replaced.
Eventually,
so on and so
ultimately, yeah,
forth.
they would.
Okay.
I think it was a short-term measure to fix or to address the need that was existing at the time.
All right, Mr. Hussey?
A couple follow-ups. The 4% increase that is currently going to officers to perform the training, I think it would be helpful to know how much that actually is total in the budget. I mean, your desire is to continue that payment, but at the same time also add a training officer. And I think one thing we'll probably want to explore is if we reduce that 4% down, what does that give us? Second question, you referenced the ISO certification, or I'm not sure the official term, but about our ability to maximize points. And I know we're at a certain level, and I know you'd be working towards another level. Maybe some clarification, I don't know if it needs to come tonight, to have a better understanding as to how does one get to the next level. And I guess I asked kind of in the way to say some of these are some incremental changes to be made to add a few points towards it. But what else would really have to happen to get to that next level would be good to know, just so we have an understanding. If the next level is a significant ways away from us, I think that would be wise to know, rather than if a couple tweaks and some points here are going to bump us up.
Okay.
That's different than if it's going to require adding a whole nother company or renovating another station or doing something like that. I think that would be helpful to give some validity to some statements here, so we know that by adding these it does add points, but to what extent.
And I may hand this over to Chief Turner just to kind of let him kind of talk about that for a second.
Just real quick to inform you about the new ISO requirements. I think one of the things that's important to remember is I don't know that we're in a position today to improve, but I think we have to be in a position to maintain. And if we don't maintain, that's, in my opinion, that's where we'll suffer 3-4 years from now whenever we do go for a new evaluation. With the new standard that they've came out with, there's more detail to the training side of it. There's more factors that we have to look at as far as maintaining those accreditation points that we get from them. So I think that's one of the key things that we're looking at now and focusing on, making sure that A, we're prepared for that, and B, we're maintaining where we're at today. Obviously, and like you said, it would be nice to lower it, but I think more crucial in anything is maintaining.
Mr. Costales.
Yes, Chief. On your sheet here, you have a training officer that you need and 2 firefighters, and you mentioned you also need 1 captain now since you've moved up.
The preference would be that we promote from within to fill the captain and driver position that's created, and then we hire the firefighters. So we also have to pay, per the work agreement, step-up pay per day, and it's $30 per day roughly for a person to step up from firefighter to driver or from driver to captain. So the sooner we can make those promotions, we're saving money, if that makes any sense. It may not seem like a lot, but it does certainly add up over time, rapidly. So our preference is to make those promotions as quickly as we can and then hire that firefighter. The reason we've held off in hiring the firefighter even in the last couple of weeks is we've had the discussion that we're currently undergoing a promotional process to hire pretty much establish the new list that we're going to create for the next 2 years. And so that process started last week. So we really wanted to we think we can turn that around pretty quickly, working with HR very closely. So we think that we can have that new list established and hire off that list to get the best possible candidates from that new list. And we kind of exhausted the previous list to be completely forthright over the last 2 years.
Of these 3 positions you have here, could you prioritize those this evening? If you had to pick which one is the most important to fill?
And I guess I would ask it, are you asking me for 1 versus 2 or 1 to 1 to 1, comparing all three?
1, 2, and 3. If we have to make a budget decision on money,
I understand. You're putting me in a very tight spot because I see the benefits of all of them. And I guess I can tell you from an administrator standpoint, my preference is the training officer. But as I understand the needs and the flexibility and the overall safety impact of the 2 firefighters, if it came down to picking 1 versus 2, I'd pick the 2 firefighters versus the 1. Now, if I had to pick between 1 to 1 to 1, I would probably say the training officer.
so if money just became available down the road, you'd take a training officer first, then a firefighter, and then another firefighter.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Prather?
Chief, would there be any areas within your budget that you might be able to take this money, or at least some of this money, to fund these firefighters, these positions?
I wasn't part of, and I'll let Chief Turner answer that, because he was part of some of those discussions in the process leading up to this point.
That's a great question, and I think I said this to Mr. Betts and the administrator both. If it came to cuts in our budget, I don't know that we could make any cuts, period. We've made those cuts over the last 5 years to the point of we're struggling now with our line items outside of personnel. I think our personnel costs are 92% of our budget. That leaves us 8% of that budget to maintain $325,000, I think, to maintain 7 facilities. So we're struggling to keep the lights on at stations this time of year without moving money into other categories. So I would say that's impossible.
Any other questions? They're here. Mr. Henry?
And Chief Schofield, what would be the total cost for the actual training officer position?
The numbers that we received from finance today, indicate that's the overall cost of $77,800. That would be the minimum cost at a minimum salary. And the reason we may not be able to do that is if we did promote from within, depending on what a current employee might make, to give them, a promotion, that number might have to go up.
So that $77,872 is that total cost?
That's the salary with all the benefits. That's correct. Now, in terms of the vehicle, we could probably figure out some way to maybe creatively get around that, and that would certainly be my preference. I would always say that we're in favor of, because we are such a service industry, we're always in favor of people and personnel over vehicles. We'll figure out some way to make that happen.
And what about the firefighters' positions?
And those are, again, 2 salaried positions with benefits based on numbers. I think that's the current numbers adjusted for the potential increase for next year. Now, the one number I would highlight there in terms of the one-time firefighter training cost is that we, in the past, probably over the past 2 years, we've only hired people that have come with that training already, that firefighter 1 and 2. And I feel strongly that we've probably missed some really good employees, some really good candidates, that we haven't given them an opportunity, if they didn't already have the training, for us to hire them and then provide the training. And so I think that is a big concern for me, and it's a large number, and what went into that number was not only the cost of the schooling, textbooks, and the fuel to get them there to class, but also the cost we would pay them as they're going through that 13-week program. So that's the reason I wanted to make sure that number was in there, because I think in this upcoming list, I know we'll have some good candidates that don't have the experience already, that don't have the Fire 1 and 2, that we really would like to hire, invest in, and that would stay with us for a long time.
Thank you.
Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Chief. And I'm just trying to go through here and, like Councilman Henry was saying, as relates to if we had to make a cut somewhere in order to get these officers and training officer and all of that. Tuition reimbursement, I see that item went up a little bit. Is that something that we could look at? Not to go through your budget line by line, but I know I'm concerned certainly with that many, not having that many officers, so I'm trying to see how we can make this happen as relates to funding not one or two of those positions. And if we look at tuition reimbursement, I know that number went up quite significant, and it's something we could possibly take a look at. And then I know that Councilman Scrivener was touching on this a little bit about the vehicles that's driven home, and you talked about gear and equipment in those vehicles. What would be in those vehicles as relates to gear and equipment that they wouldn't already have on the scene with the fire truck?
They're going to have radios, and we're going to, look at smaller items like their personal protective equipment, their safety vests and their bunker gear, all the equipment they would need to function at an incident scene safely. So, there's a lot of technology that we put in some of these vehicles to act in kind of a support role, positioned appropriately throughout the incident scene. A lot of times we have different command and control elements in different areas to make sure that we're doing the due diligence from a safety standpoint. So
you're saying that they would pretty much, it's necessary for them to drive vehicles home?
Yeah. I would just compare it, I guess, to a high patrolman. We all see a lot of patrol cars parked in front of houses, here and everywhere around the state. You would want that person to be able to respond quickly, and when they do respond, to have all the tools and equipment they need to be effective. And sometimes in all public safety business, time is the critical factor. Seconds matter. So. Yeah.
Mr. Carlos, Mr. Graham, I'm sorry. To answer your question about the tuition reimbursement, that was one of the line items under the previous administration that was cut from the fire department. So I believe if my memory serves me right, 2007 through 2010, the department's budget for tuition reimbursement was zero. So it was one of the items that was reinstated back in 2011,
right.
And it's now currently back at its original funding amount of $5,000.
Okay.
And it's really not been advertised, but we do have people taking advantage of it.
And that number is probably artificially low, and that we've got some folks that have submitted paperwork for a portion of that money for this year, and I've had at least a half dozen come up to me and tell me, hey, is that still available, for next year if we decide to pursue that? So I would hate to lose that item, just because I know that for some of our positions, we're encouraging further education.
Not saying I'm advocating that or by any means necessary, but I'm just trying to look at it. If we're trying to hire 2 firefighters and a training officer, and we have some things that we possibly can look at, then I'm just certainly looking at those items. So I'm just thinking out loud and asking you to help me to understand the real importance of that, because we're looking at a possible 2% increase. We're looking at a 10% possibly insurance increase, and so I'm just trying to take it all in.
Sure. Understand.
Other questions? Did I hear a pin drop?
I have not. Mr. Chairman, I know that one thing we didn't go over, and probably in my overview I probably missed, if I could.
Please.
The pink sheet items that we were originally put in, but that were not, I believe, not included in the budget. Do you guys have that copy? I believe you do. And I'll let Chief Turner address those because he was part of that process.
And I won't take long. The 2 pink sheet items were the replacement vehicle for the assistant chief's vehicle. If you'll remember, that was one of the items that was included in last year's budget, and it was cut. Again, we're asking for that simply because of the life expectancy of our vehicles. We budgeted $42,000. We feel comfortable with that number. It is going to eventually have to be replaced, and we are just prolonging the never that it has to be replaced at some point in time. The vehicle that we'd replace, I believe, is between 13 and 15 years old. That is starting to be a maintenance issue. Now you look at it and you're going to say, well, and much to the police chief's defense, you say, well, those vehicles only have 70,000 miles on them. That is correct. They're hard miles. But I'd also entertain you to understand that there are hour meters on these vehicles. That those hours that aren't counted for those vehicles really recognize that vehicle's probably got about 140,000 miles sitting with idle time on the fire scene constantly. So that is something we do try to track with our new fleet. The other item was the part-time staff in the administration. It was one of the items that we lost in 2012 with the part-time staff that serves a crucial role in our office, not only serving as a backup with our administrative assistant, making sure that we have somebody there to assist with those daily activities and duties, but also serves as she's very nice to schedule her vacation around payroll. But we can't predict sickness or illnesses, and if that comes to front, basically we're up a creek without somebody to do payroll. So that was one of the reasons why we included that in this year's budget as a pink sheet.
Any questions? Mr. Mihalovich?
I was looking at your original shift and apparatus staffing by shift and see that you're 2 down under 2 shifts, and then we go back to your 3 down and your proposed, and then you place a priority. I know you've been kind of painted in the corner, Chief, but for a training officer, and I was thinking I'm more inclined to spend to put on the parking lot one firefighter back in your force at what I think is about $57,145, but if you subtract away the training, it comes up pretty close to police officer, actually, as it turns out. Help me out on before I make this a parking lot item, because I'm not a professional in this field, but when I see you're down some folks here, and then it seems to me that
Yep.
All right, we'll get started in about 1 minute, please. All right, if everyone's ready, I will call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk has taken the roll. And item number 3, committee discussion of budget. Tonight I show the scheduled to be a Transit Division, Public Works Administration. Are there any comments or before we get started? Steve, do you have anything before we get started? Matt, would you care to get started?
Certainly. And I have a PowerPoint. I gave each of you a copy of it, but we'll go ahead and show it up on a slide too as we go. Bill's going to get it up, but each of you have it at your desk so you can follow along, make notes, that kind of thing. And I have, and just...
Matt, I'm sorry. A reminder that we are live tonight, and everyone remember to use your microphones, please. All right. Sorry, Matt. Go ahead.
That's all right. And I was just going to say is obviously I've got all of Public Works is in this presentation. We're not scheduled for all of Public Works, but depending on the questions, we might be able to knock it out if the group wants to. So I'll just start down through here in order, but obviously if you have questions, just stop me midstream and try to address them as we go. And that would be my preference. That way we can just progress on down through here. I don't sing well, so or dance. David Bangy does though, so we can get him up here. And I got all my I got 4 division directors with me, so we'll be able to. Good thing we made lots of copies. Oh, there it comes. But anyway, so we hopefully will be able to answer any questions with all the various division directors here. Richard Turner will start out. He's our transit division director. So I think I'll go ahead and get started. That way we can catch up on the screen here. It'll be up in shortly. But basically, what I've done for each division of Public Works is have at least 1 slide, maybe 2, depending on the number of items in the budget and just the detail that we had there. And so each are arranged similarly. They kind of have how the little boxes, if you will, flow chart kind of shows you how the division is operated, if you will, kind of in big terms. And then just some budget highlights out of the budget and just what we see as maybe a challenge. I don't know if that's the exact right word, but just things that challenge us to implement in the budget this year. So as we go through here, start with Transit Division. Just like to let everybody know how many positions there are in each of these. So there's 25 positions authorized in the transit budget. The majority of those are obviously drivers. The one new thing that was added to the budget this year was $25,000 was added to help service St. Mary's on our fixed route system. St. Mary's News Hospital will, of course, be served anyway by the paratransit system, where I'm sure you're all familiar with that from the discussions we've had in the past about paratransit. But so it'll automatically have that service. If you were a paratransit rider, you can get there. But our current bus system doesn't go past there. So what this is, there was some discussion of a whole new route, modifying routes. And so what this does is allows us really try to modify the routes, that route structure we have, to serve it with our existing routes. And really, we hadn't really requested anything for this item, but I think it was a good idea. The mayor and Steve got together and said, hey, we ought to put something in there because I'm sure there's something unforeseen, whether it's extra fuel or time or whatever. So it's good to have that in there. We're still working on how we'll modify the routes. And I got actually a second slide about that here right after this page. But so we're still working on how we would modify our existing routes. We're thinking it may take three route modifications to actually serve this and keep it within our still 40-minute headways and do that. So the $25,000 will help us achieve that. And then just some overall budget stuff here. What is the administrative chargeback that was added to the budget? It's around $250,000. Total budget almost $2.5 million. And so then I just kind of went through and said, if you add up, I thought it was kind of interesting to look at the subsidy versus, what the thing generates versus all the various grants and things. So it really, if you want to think about it in like a capital project, if you will, it's about a 55-45 split. The general fund is supporting about 45% of the transit system. So I'm sure there's some economic, and I'm sure there's lots of studies about it. Didn't go into that detail here about what spin-off you get from having a transit system serving your community. So that's what we're putting into it from the general fund, 45%. So kind of budget highlights. Challenges are things that we have to do in transit this year. In the budget, I didn't mention this already above, but in the budget there is a fare increase proposed, 50 cent fare increase. Right now it's $1 to ride the transit system per trip, and so this would go to $1.50. And so to do that, that's proposed. It was the last raise in 2007. So the one of our challenges is consider getting that accomplished. Now, that's not going to happen November 1. I think as some questions already come in, how much would that generate? There's been $30,000 put in the budget. Now, that number, it's kind of a difficult number to estimate anyway. It's just kind of a group think on that. It may take a while to get it implemented. There's always probably riders that may fall off the system, so they'll eventually come back most likely. So there's a lot of moving parts to determining what that number should be, but I think 30 is about as good as any number for now. And of course, we would monitor the budget as we went if we were able to do that and accomplish that. And the council goes along and approves it. The council approves that number. Yeah. And there's some, that and serving St. Mary's is the next item, modifying those existing routes. So there's really two things. What the next slide's about is about how do you accomplish those. Well, there's some public hearings and some analysis we have to do to accomplish those. So those take a little bit of time. And there's some stipulations on the time frames you have to advertise for those meetings. But I'll talk about those in a second. But the third thing down on the list, hire the new division director. Richard's here. He's actually a retired division director, and he's agreed to work part-time for us until we could fill that new position. So we're in the mode of right now reviewing that job description and working with HR to do that, and then we'll be advertising for that here shortly and try to get that filled. So I'm sure Richard, won't give too much personal information away, but he likes to go to the lake a lot. So, so we do need a new division director. A couple other issues that you already know about, probably resolve the Greyhound, the old Greyhound bus station issue. That'll spill probably into the new year, and so I want to get that over with. That's in our triennial review from the FTA, so they're pressuring us to get that done in a certain amount of time. So we'll have to have a resolution to that issue one way or the other. Then, of course, and this is kind of a theme throughout this presentation about the fleet, the aging fleet. Now, we're not requesting any new buses, but I just want to point out something that, we have these buses, really good buses, but they are getting older, and there's certain maintenance items that go along with that as they age. So you might replace parts of them, but it's not that you would get rid of them, but you might start replacing some more parts here soon. So just monitoring that line item or vehicle maintenance in here. Versus what we have in the budget, and of course we're not shy about 6 months from now if we see that's not going to be adequate, we may have to come back and talk about it again. But one thing we also did is adjust the shop rate at CM. Britt could probably give us better background on it, but it was around $60 an hour, and now it's going to be $90, and that's just a calculation, and Britt really does it, and so he's modified that a little bit. So the shop rate is also going to change coming up. Just the next page, go to the next slide, and this is about how to look at this fare, what has to happen to have a fare increase in the route modification. Basically, we start off with a level of and quality of service change analysis. There's 8 questions you got to answer in there basically, and we try to do this internally. So it'll take us a little time to analyze that once we figure out which routes will be modified and things like that to service St. Mary's, and then after that, there's a public hearing requirement, and it states the public hearing needs to be at the council meeting, and there's 2 specific notices. So the long one, of course, 30-day notice out to get it on the council agenda so that people can come and comment on it to the council before it's approved. And so that's kind of my review of transit. I'd be happy to answer any questions about it before we move on to the next.
Questions before we go to there's the $25,000 for the added budget for the St. Mary's route, the revised 3 existing routes in order to get St. Mary's. $25,000, is that like the additional fuel? What does?
It could be a lot of things. If you think about it, the buses are still running, whether they're going there or somewhere else, so maybe not so much fuel. Richard and I have talked about this a little bit. It was just kind of a catch-all because we think something unforeseen is going to come up, but it could be we try this. When you modify a route, it's kind of a trial and error business anyway, let's face it. you might modify it and affect a lot of people you didn't realize you were affecting. We may want to tweak it again. So there are some things there. Richard and I even talked about, this money could potentially be used to hire a temporary, like a part-time person to help. If we had a problem where we weren't meeting our headways, maybe we could hire a part-time person to help shuttle until we got the route revised to make it flow better. Things like that. I mean, there's a variety of things. It's not assigned to any particular thing right now, and it's just kind of to help out with that issue.
All right. Other questions, council? Mr. Brand?
Yes, thank you, Matt. I know we're showing the chargebacks for the different departments, and I guess this would be a question more for other departments as well. I know you said from $60 to $90 to reflect the chargeback for maintenance work and things like that. Are those same prices reflected like for police vehicles and other vehicles that we service in the city? You know what I'm saying?
We do track that time, but Bill and I talked about this earlier. I think he was a little caught off, a little off guard by it. But anyway, it could be revised. But yeah, everyone who has something maintained at central maintenance has a hourly chargeback with it.
Go ahead.
I'll just follow up on that. Okay, good. It's on. A little bit is like for the general fund departments like police and fire, we don't charge. We track the records and we know how much it costs for that, but we don't charge those particular departments for the labor down there. So it's charged to all of the enterprise funds. Since central maintenance is a general fund, we don't charge ourselves for that, but we do charge parking, wastewater, transit, airport for any work, parks if our shop does any work there as well. So we don't. Does that it makes sense?
And in this budget, just focusing on this one, so what will happen is in that vehicle maintenance line item, you're subsidizing this fund anyway. So if the vehicle maintenance fund goes up because of the chargeback, it's a circular issue. It's coming out of your subsidy but going back. You see what I'm saying? It's similar to the charging and administration charge. Right. It's the same idea. You're basically subsidizing already. It just makes that subsidy look larger, although it goes back in because they're paying it back.
So we went from 60 to 90?
$60 to $90 an hour.
Yeah.
Britt can tell you. He's here. He can talk
I guess
about
that's
how
what
he
I'm having my
calculated
problem
it.
with.
He calculated it based on our actual cost and try to be more fair about time we spend not just doing that, but I think you've tried to incorporate some of the administrative time that isn't strictly maybe just working. So when you go in and we've compared it to private shops, and I guess it's getting pretty close. You're pretty close there.
Yes, we've gone through the process of recalculating. We're trying to capture the true cost of the employee's time doing the work. The previous shop rate had been set for a number of years and had not been evaluated too closely. When we reevaluated this last year, what we did is we took at the actual production time for the employees, took a look at the fixed costs, which the employee cost of their health benefits, everything. And we calculated that, put that in, and found out that the rate comes out to be, it's approximately $90 an hour. I don't have the exact figure, but it's approximately $90 an hour. So that's the true cost of having that employee work on the vehicles. We also then went out and compared it to the other shops in town and found out to be that's a very comparable shop rate throughout Jefferson City.
All right, Ms. Ward.
Excuse me. The 50% or the 50-cent increase, is that just for a trip, one trip fare? Have you looked at also increasing is there a pass for $20, I believe that's?
Yeah, there's no break on the pass. It's $20 for 20 rides because that's $1 per ride. It's just a convenience thing, the pass. And I don't know if anybody else here wants to address that, but I think the thought was it hadn't been increased in considerable amount of time, and so I know Columbia just increased theirs and other folks. So periodically it gets revised. So there's no magic to the 50 cents, I don't believe. Per se.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Scribner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt, this first line says 25 positions authorized. Do you have 25 positions filled?
We're in the process of filling them. Actually, we've revised our hiring practice a little bit because I've been talking about probably a couple months ago. I guess it's been that we had a high turnover rate, and there was always this lag when our overtime budget was up and things of that nature. And what the city used to do was they had a test, and it was not just about driving the cognitive type test and a pretty involved test that a lot of people wouldn't make it through the test, although they were licensed to drive vehicles. And so our pool of people, it seemed to me when I looked at that issue being new to it, it seemed like we weren't getting a very good pool of people to choose from to be drivers. And so we put out an ad. We wouldn't get very many to pass the test, or some would, obviously. But and so what we've recently done, just this last advertisement actually, is said, okay, no more tests, and that's similar to other departments in public works. There's no tests like this. And so it cost us a little money to do the test, administer, and have it graded. So we deleted the test, and we're just evaluating the applications one as we do others. And they still have to have a license and have all so they can transport people. But that's how we're trying to help with getting these positions. And I think, Richard, you can correct me, but I believe we pretty well have offers out to be fully staffed. So that should help our overtime.
Good. And the second question, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth line down, or the fifth bullet point. It says federal, state, local subsidies and generated revenue, $1,336,000. What is there? And then the next line says general fund subsidy of $1,095,000. So we know that's coming from the general fund. Is the city putting any monies into the fifth line down? Does that $1,336,000 include any money from the general fund?
It's not my intention to include any money in there. No, it should be just what we generate out of our formula for our federal funding, any local subsidies, like those are Medicaid waivers, things of that nature. And so what I just did, all I did was go in the budget and try to combine all those items, just to get a feel for, even for myself, is how much money as a percent are we putting into this thing, transit.
Okay.
You'll have the same thing for airport.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that aside from whatever subsidy that we have to put in there, the city's not putting any other revenues into it, into the system. This 1,336, as you just said,
right,
is just state and
just
outside
straight
funding,
out
and fares, and fares will be included in there. Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Mr. Skostalis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Marash, this is a small number here. On the student fares, got it in there at 15,000. That's pretty consistent going back to 2011. But since the schools are now busing within 1 mile of the school versus 3 miles, seems like that would change. I know a lot of those passes probably have to do with extracurricular activities, but have the passes sold for this school year dropped compared to past or stayed the same?
I think we're still too new for that now, but I know Richard and I did discuss this, and of course Steve and everyone. But what we were thinking is, our line of thinking was certainly it's not going to be the same every year. It's going to change naturally.
Yeah.
But many of the students are riding the tripper routes, and it's more convenient and straightforward to get on. And a lot of those aren't public school kids either. And so there may be some slight taking that, but to change it, not really based on anything, we didn't feel good about it at this point. We just left it at that.
Thank you.
All right, Matt, go ahead and proceed with administration, please.
All right. All right. Moving on to administration. So now we're kind of probably starting through the flow chart here, the rest of this presentation, but Public Works Administration, that's basically myself and 2 administrative people that work in there. So, but I just want to give you a feel. There's not a lot of changes in what we recommended versus the mayor and city administrator budget. So it's a big division. It has these are people, 111 and a half full-time employees in all of Public Works, including transit and everything we talked about here on the sheet. One highlight is this change in how we do the SIP, so I just want to put that in there just to note that. We have 4 SIP positions that aren't in the budget, so that's 2 in streets, 2 in engineering. And I'd say 10 divisional budgets, just to give you an idea of how the budget books arranged, but everything in red writing has its own budget on that flow chart. So it has 10 various divisional budgets, and then the total operating, if you take out the capital, is around about, we're managing a little over about $14.5 million on those. So, and my main thing, just from my point of view, I just wanted, my challenge, I have a challenge for everybody, is just keep meeting community expectations, and that includes the council's expectations, obviously, within, these continually retracting budgets. So over the last, I'd say, 5 years anyway, had either very flat or very little change in budget. So obviously, just from inflation, obviously that's a challenge. There's little tweaks, take a little off here, a little off there. So I do find myself making a lot of transfers to cover things in utilities, and obviously it's just part of managing the budget. But that's kind of where we're at on that.
Mr. Henry?
Thank you. Mr. Marest, and thanks for the presentation. Well, just one thing here for me, the SIP positions. How are you guys how's the department getting along without those positions at this point in time?
Yeah, and I actually have back further in there in each division. I'll talk about in a little more detail, but obviously we've developed workarounds for those, and I would term those, as I've got in the presentation, more of a level of community expectation issue. If the community is satisfied with how we're doing business, then that would be okay. It's not an overtime related issue. It's not a level of service issue. So I'll state that. But I have more detail coming up here in a couple slides.
So with that, you're not, more overtime is not being created without these positions?
No, again, I can go ahead and jump into it a little bit, but like, for example, in engineering, these are basically 2 design positions. So in our CIP implementation, we used to have 4 people. Now we're down to basically 1. So, and it's a little more clear in my next slide, but so really we have 1 person that's their full-time job implementing capital improvement projects. So obviously it's going to be a little slower. We've made some adjustments in our workflow, and part of it was out of necessity, not just for that, but just because some of the bigger projects we can do more easily with consultants. It really affects some of the small projects, stormwater, sidewalk, urban gutter, those kind of things, which we do a lot of or have done in the past. You can certainly go with consultants, there's no doubt. Somebody's got to manage that contract. That's the main effect in engineering. And then, of course, streets, again, that cuts out a construction crew. But again, as the community satisfied with that level of service that they are, I haven't heard a big outcry about it. So I just wanted to, basically, I have them in my pink sheet, so I wanted to talk about them, and that's why we're in. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
You use the term managing the project. We think of a design engineer as someone who designs a project, but projects also have to be inspected as they go along, and as you put it, managed as they go along. Is that something that someone else does, or does your design engineer assist with that? I know, I believe Tia is your design engineer, is she not?
Correct.
And I know there was a situation out in the 3rd Ward with stormwater problem. And I know that she was on site trying to work with the homeowners, the neighbors. There was a kind of a dispute about where stormwater was, pipe was going to be located, and I know she was frequently out. Is that something that she does as part?
That's what I call the project management. We have an inspector, but they're there inspecting the installation, tracking the quantities, making sure things go in properly. But there's a whole avenue of project administration with every project, whether it's, and you get into these smaller projects that are in your neighborhoods, and that becomes, you'd be surprised, a small stormwater project in somebody's yard is more time consuming for us than a new signal down by Lincoln University, because really there's not many people there that are affecting their yard, and you'd be surprised how many questions you get about that bush needs to be moved there or replaced, and this type of grass I have versus that type of grass. So there's that whole management issue that comes into the project management of it, even if a consultant designed it. So, on the bigger projects, that's easier to do with our current load, but some of these smaller ones, it'll be a little bit of a challenge to keep up with those. And so we've deferred a lot of our stormwater money,
thinking, well, if the city budget's recovered, we may get these positions back. So we kind of pushed that to the back. Not completely, but some. You'll notice, I think it's in here eventually, where we're talking about, I believe it is, Bill, don't we have the cash flow of the CIP at the back? Well, I don't think we're talking about tonight, but you'll notice, a lot of that stormwater money's been pushed to the back. And some of that was just to get some of our city-county projects moving, but also, our it's, well, we may have additional personnel, or we'll take care of those later. So you may not have noticed this issue yet. I've talked to the Public Works Committee about it a couple times, just to give us a little extra time.
Well, and you and I, when we visited, you made mention of, again, going back to your concept of customer service and community expectation. You mentioned that it's not as productive sometimes or as efficient to try to let consultants manage these small projects because they're not quite as touchy-feely maybe.
Well, you're paying for every hour they're there.
Right.
If you have a staff person, they're here anyway. So we've probably encouraged that over the years I've been here. I've been here 12 years, so a little more. But we try to work with the homeowners and satisfy them when we have a project in their yard. Now that I think even consultants would tell you that's really not what their contract calls for. Good, pushes up the cost, but when you employ one of us, we're here anyway, so we're going to get the call regardless. Just like the county managing a project for us in the city, when they do it, they still don't call the county; they call us because they live in the city and they want to talk to the guy at the city.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Matt, let's proceed.
Okay. Engineering division, this is where I'll go into those two positions a little bit more detail, but basically engineering, this is all the things they do. They're on the left, and in engineering you got about one person for each box except in inspections and surveys. But we have 3 inspectors and 2 surveyors, obviously, to do that job. But we're down to, like I said, 1 in CIP design, 1 in development review, 1 in stormwater inspections, which is really kind of our EPA charge again. And then stormwater and floodplain, we have 1 engineer over there, and then David Bangy's the division director of the city engineer there. So in the budget, we had the 2 SIP positions. Well, just want to point out that it was 2 SIP positions, but in December 13, when we reorganized again, and I became the director and David changed, we also eliminated that job. So we had 4 in design last year, and now we're down to the 1 that's full-time design. So it's really about a 75% reduction in that little group of people. So probably you won't notice the effect now, but as we move forward through time, these projects take a long time to develop anyway. And in 2002, basically I was hired in 2002, and that's exactly the status they were at that time. They didn't have any designers, and I ended up spending money from 2 sales taxes with it, to get it caught up. But as soon as they hired me, then we got staffed up and had 4 full people since then, and were able to keep up with that. And so that's kind of the history there. And so I just want to give you that because we had a pink sheet in there. But again, it's all level of service related, and I got one more slide about that after this. But just challenges real quick. Obviously implement those CIP. We have put a big focus on implementing capital improvement designs, the sales tax, for our designs, and we've historically done a lot of designs. So that will be changing. And then of course with our EPA consent order, there's 2 things really there. One is we have to comply with those requirements in that consent order, which are modifying our permit and things of that nature, but also implementing new stormwater codes. So that'll affect outside people more than internal people. And so those are a couple of big challenges we're facing. And those are kind of over in the city engineer, stormwater, floodplain, permitting guys arena, and myself, of course. So we had 2 unfunded pink sheets in there. Again, these were actually in priority order when they were submitted. You look at the sheets in your book, it's basically the same thing. So I tried to put them in a little more detail here. But the number 1 priority for engineering, we have a old survey instrument, basically, is what I would call it. It's called something else, but common term survey. But it's basically a 7-year-old computer, and we use it in the field of stake projects and in-house, out-of-house. It helps us with our design contracts, or if we're designing something. Also, the guys come in. You'll notice a little bit of overtime in the budget. Most of that
is really in engineering is related to our survey guys come in maybe when the police call them, whether it's on a weekend or even at nighttime or whatever, they've had a bad crash or an accident, somebody usually a fatality, so most of the time they'll come in and survey that. So there's a little bit of overtime associated with that, but a lot of that's comp time as well. So, but that's what they utilize it for. It's already failed, it fails intermittently anyway. It's kind of gotten bad since we put this request in March. But eventually, that's going to go down. We'll have to replace it somehow. So I'll probably have to ask for a supplemental or something like that at that point. But, so we'll monitor that as we go forward. Just wanting to let you know that is a thing looming out there. It's a very expensive piece of equipment, obviously. And the new ones are much more modern, of course. Like any computer that gets old, the old ones did it this way, where all the new ones have multiple satellites connected. This one only has 2, I think, versus the 6 that it's able to connect into. So that's the intermittency that we're talking about. So that's kind of getting too technical probably. But then on the second one, the second pink sheet was the 2 design positions. And again, I think we pretty well talked about that. But I just want to make clear it's just more of a level of service issue. You want to bring it to your attention.
Mr. Scrivener.
I wanted to talk a little bit about this global navigation satellite system, Matt. You make the point here that it fails to connect intermittently, and when you and I were going over your budget, you had indicated to me that there are times when it may take an hour or 2 for it to connect because the satellites that it is working with, either they're busy or they're whatever reason, and you've had situations where you were called in by the police to reconstruct an accident and a highway would actually be closed during, or not reconstruct, but to survey the accident, and the highway would be, or street would be closed while we're waiting for this piece of equipment to connect to a satellite for as much as an hour or 2.
All true stuff. David Bangy's here, and he could be much more technical about it than I can. But yeah, that's pretty close.
Well, it would seem.
I think, David, if you help correct me if I'm wrong, but basically our old system has 2 satellite systems, a Russian one and a United States one. The new ones have 6 different available systems they can connect to. If ours is down or the Russians is down, then it just doesn't connect very easily. And so, again, it's probably some of it's old and it's out in these dusty, dirty environments all the time and being utilized all the time. But it will eventually connect. Or if we're out, may spend a couple hours fooling around with it trying to get it to connect, so we can get our field book going and then do our survey. So, we're working with it now, but again, it's probably an item that will have to be replaced. And I do a fair job with that, David.
Yes, the system works off of satellites, and then it also works off a ground beacon, and then also a cellular phone connection. So there's kind of 3 pieces that work together. And generally speaking, there's no set of conditions that would lead you to believe that it's not going to work today versus it is going to work today. And so it's very frustrating for our guys going out anticipating that this piece of equipment is going to work, and then it doesn't work. And I think there's a lot of time that's lost. But then, it's supposed to work, it doesn't, drive back to the office, try to figure out why it's not working. But the new system, as Matt indicated, is operating off of not only the U.S. and Russian satellite system, but also the Chinese, the Indian, and then there's 4 other nations that have satellites in the air that this will all pick up data from, and so it should be much more consistent.
It just seemed to me that if we're going to work with reduced force, that this might be a good investment for the city to upgrade this piece of equipment. And I'll probably, sometime before we're done with the budget process, be suggesting that we put this on the parking lot for consideration.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Scrivener. Any more questions before we move on? Matt, go ahead. You can go ahead.
Excellent.
Yes, please.
Central maintenance, not a lot to talk about here, but again, just kind of some of the same thing. Obviously, these guys maintain pretty well all city equipment with the exception of parks, unless there's some extraordinary thing that they need help with or something of that nature. I guess I take that. but basically 7.5. And one of the half position, have an administrative person that wanted to move to part-time this last budget year, so we worked with her and got that accomplished. So that's our half position we were able to save this last budget year. So that's kind of a voluntary item. So we seem to be working. We said we'd do it as a trial and see how it worked, and so far it's working out for us. So again, basically, these guys. This is our mechanics force and parts people and things like that. That they fix the equipment, and our main thing, kind of our challenge and our second bullet item, but that budget over time has remained fairly flat, and it goes up and down a little bit, but pretty flat. But our equipment is a year older, and we've grown the fleet a little bit, and so that that's our challenge. Looking at monitoring that. It's more than likely, my example of that. Steve and I were talking today. We had an example of this just recently. We got our snow plows out. We're starting to. This time of year is the time you get all of those things out and look at your trucks and put them back together. And that stuff's in salt all the time, so it rusts. And so when we put them away, Brett says, well, we get them out, and now we're finding big rust holes in parts of them that can't be there. So we had to do kind of an emergency or a shuffle of money and put in about $55,000 to get all that stuff back into order. So we were able to do that after talking to Steve and Bill. Within our existing budget, we were able to find some savings in some other line items and was allowed to go ahead and order that $55,000 worth of equipment. So that being said, more than likely, another year of equipment age, probably have some of those. We'll continue to monitor the budget through the year. Probably next spring, we'll kind of, I know Britt tracks it very closely. But as we see it gets out of whack, or we have a projection tool in Springbrook that we can utilize, so as we get out of whack, we'll keep the council informed about that. That's all of Central.
All right.
Can I just reiterate something there? That is really a concern that I know we all have, is the delay of equipment and delayed deferred maintenance on equipment. There really is a compounding effect that's occurring on equipment, and when we don't keep up, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's a real concern. Like I said when we first started out, just because it's not in the budget doesn't mean that it isn't needed or necessary, and certainly there are a lot of equipment, pieces of equipment that I think are in that same situations.
All right, thank you.
We'll highlight that in the next budget.
All right, operations, street division.
Britt's our operations director, and go to the next one. So he's over those four departments: our division, streets, central maintenance, airport, and parking. So the next one we're talking about is streets tonight. And with that, we have 23.5 positions. That's Britt is the half. He's also paid half out of parking. That's why it looks like that. But basically, we have that going back to that SIP issue, and I'll have a next sheet about street as well about that. But two of those were not funded in this budget. We actually did basically trued up our budget with transferring of one seasonal position. We normally have some seasonal workers that help paint curbs and do various grass cutting and things in the summer. But we had moved one of those to the airport, and we're just utilizing them there. So we actually transferred the money from this budget to airport in the budget book, just to make that read right and get the true cost at the airport. So that's a change there. And then, of course, again, our repairs maintenance section of the budget, that retraction I talk about, and mainly in the street budget, it's in that section. I think there's a couple items come up in that where when we had some budget problems, one year we didn't paint any curbs or anything. We just said, okay, we can't do that. We'll take that money out of the budget. Well, we put some back in, obviously, but that's been delayed. Our signal maintenance is in that section of the budget. Street light repair, things like that, sign repair. So you can delay that a little bit, but again, that's I'd say retracted. It's probably flat, but inflation, however you want to look at it, it's still, in my view, retracted. But we're continuing to do that, but we've deferred some maintenance in our signal equipment, things like that, because of that. And that's also where we had the line item for street light installation. I think Mr. Graham had a request, and we weren't able to fulfill that. That was where that line item was zeroed out, so that's still not in there. So anyway, there's a little retraction there. We talked about the challenges again. whether it's retracted budget or just reduced staffing, just meeting that community and council expectation for the street department. That's kind of a challenge of ours that we see. And then, again, back to the fleet, maintaining that at a good state of readiness for everyday work or emergency services too. Let me go to the next slide real quick, and then I'm going to have Britt explain those three graphs and have to follow this. But basically, these are within a priority order, and I didn't go into the vehicle equipment request of the 680. There was a very specific request all through there in the pink sheets, but I'll back up to the two maintenance positions. Again, that's a level of service. I want to bring to everybody's attention, community expectation issue. I think it's probably more noticeable from our in-house people, our managers, we have our street superintendent, some of those. He's got a list. Okay, this curb needs replaced, this little piece here, or this stormwater needs fixed. So he's got a list, and he was sending out 3 crews to do stuff like that. Now he's sending out 2. So, and his list is growing. Does the community or the council notice that? Are they satisfied with that level of service? And if they are, okay. And then, and really, that's really kind of like the engineering, the level of service and community expectations.
Mr. Scrivener?
You just asked us, is the council satisfied with that? How much of a backlog, in other words, you used as an example a curb repair, whereas you might have gotten the curb repaired in say 2 weeks, your list might have been long enough with 3 crews. It took 2 weeks. How long will it take now? How far behind are you? Well, does it take 3 weeks now, or does it take 6 months, or is it a year and a half?
And I don't know that we've quantified that. Britt might be able to help me out here, but I doubt that we've quantified that. It's just, like I said, I'm not sure. Maybe the community doesn't notice that, but our supervisors that manage that work do notice the list is a little long to get to that next one, or longer than it used to be. Not that it's not on the list of things we've always done, but we can get there. It's a prioritized list, basically. And a lot of them are small fixes no matter where they're at, so it's just kind of the order we find them and go from there, unless they're affecting some travel.
If you never have any backlog at all, you're probably overstaffed. You probably should have some backlog, because the incremental improvement is probably not worth the cost of being staffed to a level to have it always caught up.
Right, now I was focused on the summertime operation, I'll call it. Now, the wintertime, we've developed a workaround there, so basically in the wintertime, we push snow, we modify our crews back and have snow routes. And so everybody, whether you're in that side of the group here, let me back up to the org chart. So that we're really talking about 2 people out of that section 2 side of the things there that do street, stormwater repair, pothole patch. But when we go into winter operations, we have another 7 guys in section 1 that do that other stuff: mowing, street signs, sweeping, signal maintenance. Those guys drive snowplow. So our workaround there, we used to have a full-time loader operator, is one of the workarounds. Well, now we have the guys that they pull their truck in, they get out, and they load their own truck. Now, that takes a little extra time. Not everybody's accustomed in our staff. That's a big piece of equipment you got to do some training on. You can tear some things up easily if you're not very careful. It's a lot of times at night. Not a perfect solution, but it works, and maybe that lengthens the route. Maybe if we were going to spend 3 hours that evening plowing that route, now it's 3.5, some other number. Probably not out of community, it's still probably satisfying the community expectation on that side, but we've developed those workarounds. So there are other things too, but again, just, I boil it down to that.
Mr. Prather?
Matt, on those 2 employees in that department on the streets, is there any services that we are not doing, or is there anything that we are having to subcontract out due to the fact that we're short personnel?
And I can let Britt go a little more, but basically we're still trying to satisfy all of our workload. I mean, when you see we still do street repair, we still work on stormwater, still do pothole patching, signs, marking, the whole bit, based on our available budget. However, we were once staffed where we did larger projects where So we were trying to get to a point where we could do more in-house construction projects, where they were, say, instead of just patching a street, maybe we would relay a piece of concrete street that's half a block long or something like that. A little bit bigger repairs. So I think that's where we're getting down to. We've kind of backed off that just a little bit. Obviously, occasionally that'll come up, and we'll just have to pull everybody in and quit sweeping or whatever and say, okay, we need some. I think Mr. Kroll experienced one of those. He went out and worked for the guys, and we had quite a few people
Now, that's
there.
not why there was a delay, though.
Yeah, we made him go to
Let's
work
make
with
that
us.
clear,
And,
that
yeah,
was-
but he showed up and helped them. But it was over in Shell Ridge. We discovered a big problem during the overlay, and just had to pull people in, and we had some people off, so it was good. He showed up that day. And I wasn't there, but he was. So, but anyway, so we had to do a big concrete, the whole length of the street. I don't know if anybody saw that up there in that area, but it was quite a deal. So we make those accommodations. So I think that's where we're probably, I think that was going to be your answer.
And then obviously it's easier when you can schedule things out, but you've got
Right.
things that happen that have to be dealt with.
And I used to get the thing, we want to do bigger repairs, so we were kind of, the council and various administrators were driving us to that, and so, okay, we were fine with that. One thing about that is, though, the thing about a street department, they're not purely just like a construction contract crew where that guy's hired to do that job and they just stay at that job all day. We may have to call, well, they're over there working, so we may have to call them up and say, well, there's debris in the street, we need to go clean that up immediately. We have to lay off that job and go do that. So there's also issues with doing big jobs with the street department that isn't just solely dedicated to that. So I mean, those are contract jobs. Those end up becoming contract jobs, which then get shoved over to engineering. So that's where those become part of the contract. Now, again, we're kind of a little short there, so we'll manage that as best we can.
Mr. Scribner?
So you just raised another point that I don't know that if we considered or not, but when we do the job ourselves, it doesn't require one of our engineers to oversee it, whereas if we are having an outside contractor do it, at least part of the time we'll have an engineer on site inspecting to see that they're doing it according to specification and according to city requirements.
Right. I'm relying on that engineer there, or maybe Don Fontana, stormwater engineer, to specify any engineering that would be needed. Not a plan setter, some of that typically, but we do have engineers, their bosses, overseeing that, but it's not a project management issue like a contract.
And if I could just add to that just a little bit, we've had to change our management aspect of the work that we do, and Matt alluded to it. One of the jobs, my job as the manager of that area, was to look for ways that, yes, we need to fix this particular part, but can we do something bigger at the same time and make it more effective and more efficient? More effective and more efficient usually means more time consuming to get it done. We can't we don't have the luxury of some of those decisions when we're short crews. And so some of those things we are not able to do now. Does the community notice it? I don't know. Is it adversely affect us to the point that we need to make a big change? I can't say that for sure, but it is a different management style than we had been doing in years previous.
All right. We ready to move forward? Matt, let's proceed.
All right, and then I'll hit number 2 and then let Britt explain some of the charts. But basically, in our budget, we had several pieces of equipment in the street budget, and this kind of alludes back to what Steve was saying with central maintenance. It's really more, I want to not really focus on replacing the pothole patch truck or whatever needs to be replaced, in there. It's more about just the general issue of equipment replacement. And what we're doing now, probably you can't sustain that forever. And again, these graphs demonstrate very well. So we're not going. I prefer just to talk about the issue until you kind of quantify it for you. And back when I started working here in 02, 03-ish, we basically were in a point where our equipment was really poor. Now we're not there yet. I'm not saying that. We have some time here yet, but back then, after we started demonstrating, and I was going to pull out the memo and I never got around to it, but I had to send a memo. I was only here about a year, and I sent this memo to the city administrator. I said, okay, we're not going to sweep streets anymore because the street sweepers all falling apart in their dump truck that goes along with them only turns right and can't be driven on a highway. So, and that's a true statement, by the way. But it did seem odd to me that we were doing that, and so we said, that's unsafe. It's not even licensable. Just because we're a city, we can get away with it. So we're not going to do that anymore. And so, that kind of started this discussion. And so we don't want to be there again, obviously, and we won't. We'll tell you before then. But so it's really just a general issue about, equipment replacement citywide. This is focused on the street department, this little graph, these graphs, but it's really about that issue. We're going to have to at some point start focusing some money on some of this equipment. And at that time also, part of the problem was, once you do that, then then you go back to your vehicle maintenance budgets, and they start escalating too about it, getting out of whack if you just keep replacing. So we're not there yet. I'm not trying to say that, what we were in 03, I think it was, but Britt's got some really good graphs, I think, demonstrate it well. So I'll let him talk about it.
You would expect to get some charts and graphs from an engineering presentation, so we didn't want to disappoint. What we're trying to do here is demonstrate kind of the age and condition of our fleet. Obviously, every piece of equipment has got a different expected life, and with the street department, this is specifically about the street department, but the same graph could be shown for many other departments as well. It's just we have good data on the street department as we've been tracking it for some time. As Matt alluded to, back in 2003, is actually when I started tracking this. We at that time, the equipment, most all our equipment on average was past its expected life. The chart here actually shows it a little bit rosier picture than it was, because we actually had light-duty pickup trucks doing the job of heavy-duty pickup trucks, and obviously their life, I'm assuming that they would have the same life expectancy, and that's not exactly true. So at the beginning is the blue line, shows that at that time we didn't have very good equipment. The green line indicates the expenditures that were done each year. As you can see, as we spent more money, the life of the fleet came down, which is perfectly logical. And we sustained that level of investment for a few years and brought our life expectancy down to about 60% level, which we believe is a good sustainable level. You can pick any number you want, but you'd want most of your vehicles, half your vehicles to be slightly past 50%, and some to be less than 50%. You average around 50%. So, but then budget issues came, and our investment has waned off. And as you can see, the life expectancy has continued to rise. We've kind of highlighted that area from 20% up to the top of the chart is starting to get red. That is, we believe that at some point you have a problem. Where that point is, we're not exactly sure. We can't tell you that tomorrow everything will break and we won't be able to do our job. But obviously, the older something gets, the more it's logical that the more chances that something's going to happen. This chart then illustrates that if we continue to not invest anything in that fleet, you can see the age as it will increase, and we will get back to that situation where it was when the guys are mission focused, or should be task oriented and mission focused. So they'll go out there and try to drive a truck that won't turn right and go out on the highway if we let them. So we have to take those tools away to keep them safe and keep the city citizens safe as well. So we don't want to be there. Then the question is, well, what do we need to do? If we wanted to just stay where we're at right now, we did some numbers, we played around, and based on a capital investment in 2015 dollars of about $250 a year into that equipment, $250,000 a year, we could basically freeze and keep our life expectancy of our fleet in the street department where it is today. And that's one decision. And again, the green line shows that level of investment, and the blue line shows the age staying around that 20% level. We wouldn't consider that ideal, but certainly better than option one that we had just previously. Next, we said, well, what would it take to get us where we think is the right place to be? And that number came out to be about approximately $500,000 a year on average. As you can see, when we do that, we bend that curve down to around that 40 to 60% level and get in there. The investment is about $500,000 a year. We know that money doesn't just happen, and that we all want doesn't mean that we necessarily are going to get. It has to be manage the resources that are available. But the purpose of these three charts is to just tell that story that we don't want to be on an unsustainable path. And it's simply math. And if you'll look back in our pink sheets over previous years, you'll find that our pink sheets usually add up in the same $600,000, $500,000, $600,000 range. That's where we've come up with that, and we just wanted to share that information with you just so you knew where we were coming from.
And I just want one final comment on that now. Probably as future budgets go along, if I'm still here. We wanted to bring the issue of the employees up in a pink sheet. Now, everybody's heard that level of service issue. Now, probably, those won't be filled. I get all that. In the future, we probably won't have pink sheets about unless something changes. But you will probably continue to see pink sheets out of our department about equipment because of, just a notification issue that's not going to get any better. On the people, we do develop workarounds, and if that's satisfying community expectations, okay. And unless something drastic were to change.
All right. Mr. Scrivener?
You're talking about $500,000 a year to maintain, what was it, 40%?
Yes, that would be true.
Okay. What is the value of our
I'm sorry, I should
our
have
fleet?
explained that. Being an engineer, I think everybody thinks the way that we do, and that you've been looking at this data for the last 10 years like I have. I apologize for that. If we had the same kind of a vehicle, I could tell you that it'll last 10 years or 10, 12 years, or whatever that number is. And on that left side of that chart, I would have the years, the age of the vehicle. But we have over 60 pieces of equipment, would range in life expectancy from 8 or 9 years to as much as 30 years. So what we've done is we've averaged that and used it as a percentage. When you reach zero, as you go up the chart, that the equipment has reached its expected life. So if it's a 50, and we average, so you can substitute 12 years there. That is the average of what our equipment lasts, is 12 years. But I couldn't really say 12 years without lying because some of it's 8, some of it's 30. So it averages 12. So in this situation, if we just assume that we all had 12-year equipment, 0% would be 12, 40% would be somewhere around 8 years old. We'd average, our equipment would average being about 8 years old.
I appreciate that explanation, but let me re-ask my question and ask it in a way that actually would maybe state what I was trying to say, because that was a good explanation. I appreciate it. Yeah, just the wrong question, wrong response to the question, I guess. No, what I want to know is what's the value of our fleet? In other words, if we had to go out and buy it all new today, what if you're going to spend $500,000? Are you spending $500,000 on a $5 million fleet or on a $1 million fleet?
The replacement value of the street department's fleet and the street department fleet only is a little over $6 million. That's the replacement value. And just to give you a snapshot of where we are today, $2.9 million of that equipment is at or past its expected service life. So 47% of our equipment is currently at or past its service life.
So you're basically wanting to spend less than 10% of the total value a year.
That would be true.
Okay.
I think we're ready.
All right. Thanks, Rick. And he's also in charge of the airport division. It's the next one. And so now we're going off the chart of the schedule, so I think we're making time here. Basically, not a lot of changes in the budget here, but there's 2 positions at our airport, just so everybody knows. And that's basically our manager and a maintenance person. We've obviously a lot of grass mowing occurs at the airport just from FAA regulation-wise. And so that's where we transferred. We had to have some help there keeping that grass mowed and various things. So we transferred that person over there. Now we're transferring it in the budget to have a seasonal part-time person to help with those issues. Administrative chargeback, just kind of informational. That's been added to the budget. Used to not occur because it was a subsidized division, but they have a chargeback now of $44,000. So what that reason I'm just pointing that out, it gives a truer cost. I think is how we're stating that is that other utilities have a chargeback, and so we hadn't ever done that in the budget in the past because it was a subsidized utility. So basically, you're just taking the 44 in and putting it back out to the general fund, but it just gives you a truer cost of what it costs to operate an airport, and that pays for people like me or Steve or Bill or various people to do work with it. That's what that does, and it's based on a percent calculation that finance does of the overall budget. Then the subsidy, of course, is almost $200,000 to operate the airport, which is about almost half of what it costs to operate our airport. And so, just really, again, maintain that facility. We have limited staffing there. They clean all the bathrooms over at the shop. They do everything. And so that's a small group of people, but kind of a big facility to maintain. And then, and of course, it's kind of a little bit regulatory driven, not like a wastewater division, but it does have a fair amount of regulation with it, so there's reports and various things for them to do. And then one of our big challenges and kind of an exciting one is we have our big runway project, our CIP, that's on the council agenda for a second reading next meeting. And so that will be interesting as we go through this next year to get that accomplished.
Mr. Hussey?
Matt, you may not have the answer to this question. I know I hear it from time to time in the community about the airport. We're putting city tax dollars into an airport that's not a commercial airport, or used by us, but it's a private airport. Do you have any good data on the economic impact of the airport on the community? Just
we do, and we've actually presented, and Britt's coming back up here, but we presented to the Public Works Committee a couple times now, but I want to say the number, 22 million, because MoDOT calculates that for all the airports in the state, and so we just took our little sheet out of that book and, just to demonstrate every once in a while what our economic spin-off is. So for $200,000 of city money, because the other $200,000 is basically either user fees or grants, subsidies from FAA or whomever. You get about $23 million economic impact according to MoDOT. So that's bringing in goods, services, what have you.
Yeah, and I knew it was big. I just wanted to make sure you said that in this budget hearing too, so people see that, they know there's a true economic impact.
Mr. Scribner?
Are there monies other than just the annual subsidy from general revenue that we spend at the airport, i.e. capital improvement match?
Right. There's in the sales tax, there are, and that's true of some of the other divisions as well. I didn't point that out. But in the 5-year capital improvement sales tax in the airport, there's been $500,000 allotted in this 5-year increment. And that's kind of historically been the case. And it pays for those grant matching funds. So when we do a capital improvement at the airport, typically it's on the airport master plan. All those consultant contracts we're talking about next council meeting, those are all heavily subsidized by the feds and MoDOT, mainly the federal government. But our match from that comes from the capital improvement sales tax. And so when the sales tax is developed, there's a cost percentage that is looked at in that sales tax and allotted to various programs, and that's historically been about $500,000 for at least the last 15 years, I believe.
But even at that, that's a pretty good payback. Even because that's $100,000 a year, and you said the economic impact is 23 million a year.
Right, and I'm not sure what goes into their 23 million, but you can also look at most airport projects. The match is about either a 5 or 10% match on our big runway thing. It averages out to be about 6, and so for that 500,000, that's equivalent. You could say, let's say 10%. So you're really getting at least 90% more than that in federal money coming in, just on the capital improvement side, just get those hard improvements in the infrastructure of it. Generally infrastructure related, some of that's design money and inspection.
Sure. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, Matt, go ahead.
Okay, parking, last one of operations. Again, this is one of our utilities that does not require subsidy from the general fund. It's got 7.5 divisions. Again, for it's the half, and then the rest of them work in parking. And I didn't really break out what parking does, but basically, well, I did there at the bottom, excuse me. But we have a big main garage, we call it, the 540 space garage. We have a small parking deck, about 74 spaces over there, 14 reserved lots, 7 meter lots, and then our on-street parking meters. And so that staff not only regulates, enforces the codes on those, but also maintains them, cleans snow off them, all of the above. Picks up trash every morning, a whole bit. I think they add a good value to downtown as well. There's probably some spin off there that they accommodate things in the downtown as well. In the budget, though, the chargeback's about $150,000 that pays to the general fund. So again, it not only generates its own money, but it's able to pay the chargeback to the general fund as well. So this is like a small business, if you will, is the way Britt and I kind of look at it, and it modify things. It affects the bottom line, whether up or down. Parking spot maintenance, that's a new one in the budget. It was brought up about, well, based on the list below there I just went over, there's that parking aisle along the streets that really street departments maintain, whether it's clearing the snow off of those or painting the spaces or doing various things, lighting them. We're paying the lighting for a lot of that area out of the street maintenance budget. So it was not a, I don't think, a big calculation in, but in addition to the fund chargeback, we included about $25,000 there. I felt that was, I agreed that was probably justified. And then within the budget also that have been funded are the pink sheet items, maintenance truck, and an enforcement vehicle. You might remember last year we ordered 2 enforcement vehicles. We have 3. This would round that out. We're still evaluating whether we want to stay with the electric scooter or not. Once we figure that out, that this won't be ordered tomorrow, but we'll make a good decision, and that'll eventually come back to the council as well. It's kind of the highlights of the parking fund budget.
Mr. Henry?
Matt, on average, how much does the parking fund generate as far as revenue goes?
I want to say, in round terms, I always say it's about $1 million business. I don't know what's in the budget this year. Somebody help me out over there. That is the table. 900 something. But it's roughly $1 million business. Oh, 1.2? Yeah. So, and I didn't go into the whole book and, just try to hit the highlights, but Sheila has them, or Bill down there. Bill, he's quoting me all kinds of numbers. He's not off the top of his head. But basically, most of the time, we're able to put money into the parking fund balance. So not only what we're generating is to cover all of the costs we're talking about there in district operations, but also usually have a contribution to the parking fund balance. That's growing. That was talked about being kind of saved back for a future parking garage, or we've talked about housing authority lot purchases, whether it's a garage or just improvements of existing lots, like if we overlay a lot, fix it, or whatever, come out of there. One thing I didn't point out in here, typically in previous budgets, we kind of rounded that out. We put the revenue, I believe we kind of zeroed it out in previous budgets is how we did it, but basically we would put in capital improvement whatever was left over after we covered the expenses. A lot of times we never spent it, we didn't maybe get the engineering time to get things done, or whatever the reason was. We were waiting on conference center decisions, things like that. So that's not in the budget this year, but that just goes back into the fund balance. So if we decide to do a project, like say we want to overlay or chip seal a lot, what we'll have to do is come back to the council when we want to do that project, get supplemental out of their fund balance to do that project. So again, based on timing of people's timing, we may have that'll likely. Rick probably has some projects in mind. I can't recall them right now.
Just to make sure, it's $956,000 is what we're estimating the revenue for this year. So
That includes the transfer back to
that's correct. So another $190,000 of a transfer back to the fund balance. So
total revenue of $1.45 billion.
there you go. Britt must have done the calculations.
Mr. Costales, do you still have a question? Go ahead, please.
with the 2 new vehicles being purchased, then the vehicle maintenance will go down, and that money could then be, that's in the budget, be moved over to like parking spot maintenance?
Not necessarily. I mean, whatever is not used will go
Within
back to
house.
the fund balance.
Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. And so like I think what I just heard from 2 people is we have a budget around 900 some thousand. There's already 190 going back to the fund balance, so whatever's not, historically, we haven't used all that budget either. So whatever doesn't get used will roll back into the parking fund balance.
Which
Thank
is
you.
typical, you save it up for
Yeah.
a big project.
For a big,
project,
big purchase?
Whether it's a vehicle or a new parking garage somewhere, buying property to build lots or reconstructing a lot, whatever.
Mr. Scrivener?
I had a question, I can't remember what if if you do a project of some kind, I know the engineering was involved in, for instance, a conference center drawing, doing estimates of costs and things like that. If you do something for one of these enterprise funds, engineering staff, is there any chargeback for that, or is that just all covered by administrative charges?
It hasn't been historically, it's just been covered by the charge.
Just the one-time administrative covers all of that? That's probably reasonable.
Historically what we've done, it could.
Sure, because there's probably years you do more and
Yeah.
other years you don't, so you just do it on an average.
And like my time, for example, I'm not in there, I'm in that chargeback, Brady does most of it probably, but, there's obviously
Sure.
administrative time.
Okay.
Mr. Hussey?
This may be a bigger picture question for Steve and Matt a little bit, but you brought up the point about the $500,000 needed annually just to keep our fleet at a good place on age-wise. And we spend a lot of money out of the capital improvement sales tax on projects out there. And I just wonder if we've got a storm brewing here where we don't exactly have the general revenue funds to maybe staff positions at a level that are needed. We don't really have the general revenue funds to purchase the equipment that we need to execute these projects, but we're funding these projects, or there's funds in place for capital improvement for these projects. What's the possibility or the long-term thought of making some of these larger purchases out of the capital improvement fund? Because it doesn't really make much sense to promise projects to the public in that fund if we can't afford the equipment or the staff to execute those projects.
I think it's a good suggestion, similar to what we did with police vehicles. We took some of those out of sales tax, certainly in the next sales tax, which is 2017, if that's approved. I think that would be an appropriate thing to do, is to plan on having more of that sales tax identified for vehicles and equipment. So it's,
Yeah, and I would say that people love projects, and I get it, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we're cautious as a city to not overcommit ourselves in those sales tax and not have the resources
right,
to
short-sighted
follow
somewhere
through.
else. So I think it's
Yeah.
a good point.
Okay.
Can I add? On some sales tax in other places, communities, other entities, they do have an administrative charge allotted in their sales tax to administer it. We don't do that typically. Our habits since I've been here, and that may be one avenue where you could charge your in-house time against it. But then, just going back to community expectation, there's a group that's always formed to kind of look at the sales tax and promote it if they choose to. Not, we can't really promote it ourselves, but so what's the community's expectation there? What's going to be in the sales tax?
Yeah. Actually,
we're always worried about.
I was going to say, when we were talking about the possibility of demolishing the transit building, one of the things we talked about was look at the feasibility of charging back some of that time to the sales tax, and then that would get repaid over time. So I think both of those are good points.
Mr. Scrivener?
I do think that we need to be very, very cautious about reprioritizing or redirecting funds in the sales tax, though, because I know I think I've been part of two, or at least will be part of a second sales tax cycle here, and I came in right on the end of a sales tax cycle, and everyone on the council and the mayor at the time, John Landwehr, was very, very adamant that what we promised the voters is what we deliver to the voters. And we've created brochures each time that itemized and characterized what we were going to spend the money on. And I just think that there's probably at this point not anything more critical to our community than seeing that tax pass each time, is at least in terms of being able to move forward with projects. And I would hate to jeopardize it by any sort of manipulation of that of what the tax is used for.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd consider it a manipulation, but that's certainly a discussion for you all to have at a later time. I can tell you my biggest concern, as I said at the beginning, was the deferred maintenance and the delay of equipment. It's going to catch up however many charts you want to look at, or we have it broken down over 5 years. It's a time bomb out there.
I totally agree with you. That's a huge concern of mine as well.
All right, Matt, let's move to wastewater.
Wastewater, I've got 2 or 3 slides here, but basically same format. Kind of on the left, wastewater admin's basically Eric, administrative person, and an engineering tech that works out of this building. But then we have two different crews that basically maintain our collection system. You see how many miles of line that is, considerable. We're a regional wastewater division, so it's not just inside the city, but it's regionally serves the area. And then, of course, our treatment plant. And I actually had a typo there. It's 33 pump stations, not 38. I caught that right before this, with Eric's help. And our main plant is a very prominent plant. We just kind of discussed it at our open house the other day that we won awards on it and various things. But that's kind of how we separate our sections, and they maintain the pump station and plant. Within wastewater, another division that is self-supported from its revenue, 35 positions there. Basically the general fund chargeback, so what we pay for legal help or finance or whatever, almost approaching $800,000 from the wastewater division. The revenue projected out of this budget is about $9.5 million. So a lot of times I kind of say, well, we have about a $10 million wastewater business at the city. Then I just want to hit the fund reserves. Now, the $6 million, a little over $6 million in fund reserves, and this is basically from the 2013 audit, the 2 little bullet points below. But the 2013 audit, I got that from Sheila just today, a little over $4 million there. But then we also have another little reserve account called the bond replacement reserve, is $2 million. Now, we agreed with DNR we would make periodic payments to this reserve until it reached $2 million. And so last year I was kind of looking at that being new to it and saw this payment, but we had a big reserve over here. So we kind of shifted some money and just fully funded that a couple years ahead of the schedule. So, but you add those two numbers together, that's where I get back to we're about a 63% reserve on this fund. So a good, healthy fund. Now, that doesn't mean we run out and spend a lot of money on the other hand either, because what we also have, we know there's things coming up. We've actually had a consultant do a financial model where when we go through these bond projects and do these big projects, because there's going to be more regulation all the time about wastewater. So we go through that, and so we're plugging in numbers to this thing, and we don't want our reserves to drop either below acceptable levels. And so that kind of moves up and down a little bit. But sometimes we do take money out of the reserves to do a capital project outside of a bond, just out of cash, in other words. And that's in this budget as well. So I just want to hit that a little bit. So within the pink sheets that were funded out of this budget, the $1.183 million there, 940 of that came actually reduced the reserve. The other was just out of the cash that was coming in. And so that drops that 63% to about 53% fund reserve at that point. We did have some unfunded ones I'd really kind of like to see in there still, the $1.45 million. And if funded, then considering the $2 million and what's left in the main reserve, you're about at a 38% cash reserve, fund reserve. So on the next sheet, I've prioritized the 7 that I'm talking about there for the 1.45 million. But basically, I just down on the challenges part, what's coming up with those guys. So we have 3 big projects that we're focused on, and this is all part of our EPA consent order, and they're mainly, they are funded through this $35 million bond plan that we've all talked about here this last year. We just got a new loan on that. So we still have more money to loan on our $35 million authority from the voters. But this next year, we'll be focused on our Phase 2 basin, the 5-6 project. We've already started it near the Lafayette interchange, but now we've been meeting with Lincoln and various things, having meetings, getting right away. But that'll continue on up through Lincoln University and then over towards the highway and kind of that side of town. Also, Basin 12, that's, I'll call it the Bel Air area. You know, the guys in sewer, they quote these basins at me, and I got to get my head working. I'm sure you guys do too. Where's Basin 12? So I kind of characterize that in the older part of town of Bel Air. So these are basically taking out overflow issues, things like that when it rains a lot, or trying to redo these sewers so that they don't leak as bad and then overflowing basements or into streams or whatever. And then Hazelton Pump Station, an old pump station we've talked a lot about. That's in our EPA commitment as well. So those are some 3 big projects we're focused on next year. And so if we can go to the next slide, when I say what's not in the budget is $1.45 million, basically this is the 7 projects that would total up to. And they're all good projects. If we want to keep more fund balance, I get that. But I would really like to see some of these in there. In priority order, we have a sewer in the Woodward subdivision. This is actually out in Cole County. But it's an overflow compliance issue we know about. The design is completed, so we can do that in conjunction with a project Cole County Public Works is doing. Probably even save ourselves some money on street repair and things like that. So that's kind of our 1 priority there. Number 2, we have some Westview Heights again, not inside the city limits, but there's an old pump there that needs to really replace. That's about a $20,000 deal. Sharon Drive Pump Station, eliminating that and going to gravity. That's in that Binder Lake area. Again, most of these are overflow compliance issues, so if things don't go well for us, we'd be in a compliance problem anyway. Then we have a truck over at the plant, again, really served its purpose, 12-year-old truck. And then the blowers at the main plant, there's 3 blowers at our main plant. They basically 2 of them operate to aerate the basins all the time. And if, most of you have been over there, and if you haven't, I'd be glad to give you a tour. It's quite a thing to look at, but one of those has been rebuilt already, so we always have a spare. But again, those will need replaced soon, and so that was that request. So Eric's calculated the power savings on just more efficient motors and things would be basically a 15-year payback to our fund. The jetter truck, number 6, certainly it's only a 7-year-old truck. However, we kind of look at about a 9-year replacement on that typically, but that particular piece of equipment, I won't say it's a complete limit, but it has had a lot of maintenance issues with it compared to our other jetter. And so we want to kind of put that in the mix of things to replace. And basically what that does, it gets sewers, cleans them, if you will. And then some security lighting. I know it's a small item, but our lighting is a little unreliable at the plant. We like to keep it on at night. It's kind of a security issue. So I think order that's where I'm at.
Matt? Wastewater, the utility has over 20,000 customers. Are those hookups? What?
Get Eric up here, maybe help me answer something. Say that again, please.
Page 242 under wastewater. It says 20,000, all this.
242?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, the 20,000 customers, yeah.
Those will be...
You pay your sewer bill, your
on one hookup? Okay, goes beyond the city limits.
Yes, sir.
And other areas.
I kind of the general number, it's not exact. We talk about this every once in a while. Roughly 14, because of sewer trash bills and various things, I like to say I think there's 14,000 residential parcels. Is that somewhere in that range? 13, 14, somewhere there? Sure. You may not know that. Well, it's more GIS related. That's right. But we use that number, I use that number a lot over. You can kind of see, of course, we have commercial customers too, but the lion's share of people are obviously in the city. But, there are outside customers, obviously, if you look at the map.
Are there, Mr. Scrivener?
Matt, when I look down through here, most of the things here, I think maybe all but 3 are, well, all but 4, I guess, are issues that deal with compliance and concerns about compliance. And I know that city staff just spent quite a little bit of time with, it was either DNR or EPA, I'm not sure which, but I know that there was an issue with some of our overflows and so forth, and that we actually came up with an agreement with them to satisfy them and end up paying a reasonable fine, I guess. Or we will be. I don't know if we've paid it yet now or not. But
Making installment payments.
Making installment payments, okay. But anyway, we did have to enter into an agreement with them. And so I guess I'm wondering on this reserve of 63% fund reserve, is there a number that we just really are dedicated to maintaining? Because it would seem to me that that there are funds there to make some of these replacements, and it is self-funding. And unless we've got something that we're holding that money back to spend on in the future, it would seem to me that this is one of those instances where delaying, there's no real advantage to us to delay some of these purchases. Am I missing something?
No, I don't believe so, and that's why I kind of want to give you the percentiles there. And just see if we can get
I mean, it is an enterprise, and it does fund itself,
right.
and it is returning money to the fund balance every year.
Well, it moves up
And
and down, like I
well,
said.
I know, but I'm saying for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, no, it
And-
maintains a balance, and, it's based on a rate structure. We have a built-in rate structure, and so, yeah, we're very cautious about it. Obviously, we don't want to get the city sewer rates out of whack or anything like that with the others in the state even, or region. And so I think Jefferson City actually has some really good sewer rates compared to others.
Well, I think that's true. What are we, like the second lowest out of?
Barry may know the stats better than
Yeah, I think Columbia might be a little lower, but barely lower.
we know it's really cool.
But that's the only one in the area. It would seem reasonable to me that the only thing on here that I question of the 7 items would be the half-ton truck. I haven't seen it. I don't know how bad shape it is, but trucks don't really start running well till they get 96,000 miles on them. At least the ones I drive. So anyway, I mean, I have no idea, but that would be the only thing on there that I wouldn't think that we ought to go ahead and do.
Other questions, comments? Wastewater? Any other comments on any of tonight's presentations? If not, we have reached the end of item number 3, committee discussion of budget. Item number 4, Mr. Betts.
Just like to talk about the schedule real quick, if I could, for upcoming. The next meeting's on Thursday. We'll be talking about planning and protective services, and then we'll be talking about the administrative areas of the budget, starting with the mayor and council, city administrator, city clerk, human resources, city councilor, municipal court, finance, information technology, and non-departmental. We are a little bit ahead of the schedule since we did wastewater, airport, and parking. So on next Monday at the meeting, I believe we'll talk about the Parks Department will do their presentation. We'll also probably do a presentation on the 5-year capital improvements plan. In the past, we've held that off to like December or January, but we feel it's best to do this part of the budget process as well, so the council can see that the 5-year plan there for sales tax.
5-year projections?
Yep.
And that is what night?
Monday. And not the projections. We're talking about the 5-year sales tax plan for capital sales tax F. And then there's also a section of the budget book, section 6, where we have our special revenue funds. If the council would like to discuss those on Monday, we can discuss those. They're very small areas of the budget, such as the Veterans Plaza and those kind of things. So we'll be able to talk about those. And then after that, we will have concluded talking about all areas of the budget. So I would propose that then on Thursday, the council can then discuss the parking lot and the different items at that time. So, and then we have our public hearing about the budget at next week's city council meeting.
Say that again, please, that last part.
We have our public hearing next Monday night at 6 o'clock at the city council meeting. 2 Mondays. October the 6th, sorry.
And let's see here. What happens a week from Thursday, October 2nd?
From after that, if the council does not approve the budget on October the 6th, then we would come back, have a budget committee meeting for you to continue to discuss any parking lot items or changes to the budget that you'd like to make.
Will we complete the end of the discussions by department on the 29th?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. All right. Any comments? Mr. Scribner?
Are we open to motions for the parking lot?
The floor is open.
I don't know if this item actually would have to go on the parking lot because it is it is funded out of its own budget, but I move that we fund the wastewater unfunded pink sheet supplemental request priorities 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7.
Moved by Mr. Scribner, seconded by Mr. Hussey.
Yes. It's on this, it's item 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. The only one, eliminate 4.
As maker of the motion, do you have any comments?
I would just say that it's not going to affect the general revenue. It's going to come entirely from the reserve funds that are in wastewater division, and that is a self-funding. Really, it's a closed division in terms of money. And so, since it's coming out of there, and the administrator has not indicated a desire to maintain the fund at 63%, and based on the reaction from the interim finance director, he doesn't see that we need that much of a fund balance either. So, and there's no indication that we have any anticipated large expenditures on the horizon that would cause us problems to have the fund balance reduced by that $1,450,000. I guess we're actually reducing it about $1,429,000. Is that right? Is my math right? So that's my reasoning behind it.
Questions, comments, questions of staff? Mr. Costales?
If we do all these expenditures, it would get the fund down to about 38%, and the financial policy calls for a minimum of 10%, so that fund balance is still sitting very safe at 4 times the recommended minimum.
I don't want to get into discussion right now on what an appropriate fund balance would be. I think that's something for a later time. I think 10% is too low from my point of view. A wastewater fund is different than a general fund. I didn't put those other unfunded items in the budget because I was wanting to reserve some money for the big thing that's going to come. I don't know when it's going to come, but I know it's going to come. And we've got $40 million in bonds that we've taken out.
And I didn't think that going out for bonds, trying to do that quickly for that big thing that's going to happen, would be appropriate. So that's why I didn't fund those particular ones. And at the time, I didn't have some of the information that you were provided. And I question whether we've got the bond coverage done. Have you looked at the bond coverage, and that's all covered with the $2 million? So we're all good there. So that's why I didn't have that in there.
I'm certainly not criticizing you not having it in there. I just think that, you talked earlier about a time bomb with some of these things, and I think this represents somewhat of a time bomb, too.
If you're comfortable with what's coming, I don't know when that is.
Yeah, well.
But that's the piece, but that's why I didn't have it.
Okay. And the motion is to place this on the parking lot for now. Mr. Mihalovich, do you have any comments?
Does this really amend the bottom line of the budget in terms of...
Mr. Betts?
It doesn't have any effect on the general fund, but it does have an effect on wastewater's budget, their portion of the budget. They have their own separate budget here, so we will be taking money out of their fund balance and adding that in, and we'll put these expense line items into the budget as well so that they can work on those projects. So the general fund bottom line, the $29.5 million, it does not have any impact on, but wastewater has its own budget that it will have an impact on. So.
Other comments? If not, I believe you're ready to vote. Madam Clerk, would you read the motion, please?
The motion is to move to the parking lot for the wastewater pink sheet funds, items 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6.
And 7.
And 7, I'm sorry. And 7.
All right. Take the vote, please.
Branch?
Aye.
Costales?
Aye.
Graham?
Aye.
Henry?
Aye.
Hussey?
Aye.
Mihalovich?
Aye.
Prather?
Aye.
Scrivener? Ward?
Aye.
Bray?
Aye. It passes. It's on the parking lot. Mr.
Another
Scrivener?
motion? Mr. Chairman, I move to, let me find it here real quick. On the pink sheet supplemental request under engineering, item 1, global navigation satellite system for $18,900. I move to put that on the parking lot.
Motion by Mr. Scrivener, second by Mr. Hussey. Comments by the maker of the motion?
I just think that if we're going to ask our staff to do more with less, this is one area where we need to give them more rather than less. We need to upgrade this equipment. It is obsolete and malfunctioning, and it is decreasing the efficiency of our engineering staff and decreasing the efficiency of our police department when the engineering staff is called in to assist the police department at accidents and so forth. It's a relatively minor amount of money, and I would like to put it on the parking lot and see if we can find a way to fund it.
Other comments? Anyone? Madam Clerk, call for the vote.
Branch?
Aye.
Costales?
Aye.
Graham?
Aye.
Henry? Hussey?
Aye.
Mihalovich?
Aye.
Prather?
Aye.
Scrivener?
Aye.
Ward?
Aye.
Bray?
Aye. Anyone else? Any comments or anything before we? Again, a reminder, Thursday at 5:30, Planning and Protective Services. Item number 4, adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Hussey and Graham. All in favor say aye. We're adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone.